They said he'd be a monster, a rough, violent man who'd break her spirit like wild horses on the frontier. Evelyn Carter stepped off that dusty Montana train in 1875, prepared for cruelty, prepared for survival, prepared for anything except kindness. But when Caleb Morgan looked into her frightened eyes and spoke 7 impossible words, "I'll be kind to you, I promise," everything she believed about her fate shattered. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey has traveled. The Boston rain fell in sheets that October morning, drumming against the train station's tin roof like 1,000 urgent fingers tapping out a warning Evelyn Carter couldn't ignore. She stood on platform 7 with a worn leather suitcase at her feet and a letter clutched so tightly in her gloved hands that the paper had gone soft with moisture and desperation. Around her, the station bustled with life. Businessmen in top hats rushing toward their futures, families embracing, lovers stealing kisses behind pillars. But Evelyn felt utterly alone, a ghost already, haunting the edges of a life that no longer belonged to her. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, delivered by her father's attorney with the cold efficiency of a death sentence. The words were burned into her memory now, each one a brand. "Your passage has been arranged. You will marry Mr. Caleb Morgan of Silver Creek, Montana Territory. The agreement is finalized. Your father's debts are settled. You leave October 15th. No courtship, no choice, just transaction." Evelyn's mother had pulled her aside the night before departure, her once beautiful face now haggard from years of bearing her own husband's cruelty. In the dim gaslight of Evelyn's childhood bedroom, stripped now of all its girlish treasures to pay creditors, her mother had gripped her shoulders with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Evelyn. Listen carefully." Her mother's voice had been urgent, desperate. "Men on the frontier are not like the gentlemen in our parlors. They're rough, hard, violent. This rancher, this Caleb Morgan, he paid good money for a wife, and he'll expect obedience, complete obedience." "Mother, please." "No." Her mother's fingers had dug deeper. "You must understand. Submit to everything. Fight nothing. When he raises his voice, lower yours. When he raises his hand—" She'd stopped, and in that pause, Evelyn had seen decades of her mother's own suffering flash across her features. "When he raises his hand, you endure. You survive. That's all women like us can do. Survive." Now, standing in the rain with that warning echoing in her mind, Evelyn watched the great locomotive hiss and steam before her like a mechanical dragon preparing to carry her to some distant, terrible fate. The conductor called for boarding, his voice barely audible above the storm and the chaos of the station. She didn't want to move. Her feet felt rooted to the platform, her body's last rebellion against a future she couldn't control. But what choice did she have? Return to her father's house, where creditors circled like vultures? Where her own father had looked at her not as a daughter, but as a commodity, a thing to be sold to settle his gambling debts and failed investments? Miss, you boarding or not?" The conductor appeared at her elbow, impatient. Evelyn picked up her suitcase, so light, containing all that remained of her 22 years, and climbed aboard. The journey west took 7 days, each one carrying her farther from everything she'd ever known. The train rattled through Pennsylvania's rolling hills, across Ohio's farmlands, into the great sprawling prairie that seemed to stretch forever beneath an endless sky. With each mile, the landscape grew wilder, less tamed, less civilized. The passengers changed too. The Boston businessmen and society ladies gave way to farmers, prospectors, women with hard eyes and harder stories, men with guns on their hips and dust in their beards. Evelyn kept to herself, occupying a corner seat by the window, watching America transform outside the glass. She'd brought 3 books, Austen, Bronte, and a volume of Whitman's poetry, but found she couldn't focus on the words. Instead, she invented stories about her fellow passengers to distract herself from her own fate. That woman in the threadbare dress was fleeing a cruel husband. That man with the Bible was searching for redemption. That child with the dirty face was an orphan heading toward an uncertain future, just like her. At night, when the train stopped at various stations to take on water and coal, Evelyn would step onto the platforms and look up at unfamiliar stars. She'd grown up with Boston Harbor and brick buildings and gas street lamps. Out here, The darkness was complete and absolute, broken only by the occasional lonely light of a distant homestead. The vastness terrified her. How did people survive in such emptiness? How did they not simply blow away like dust? On the fifth day, a woman sat down across from her. She was perhaps 40, with weathered skin and kind eyes, wearing practical traveling clothes that had seen better days. "First time west?" the woman asked, her accent marking her as from somewhere in the middle states, Illinois perhaps, or Iowa. Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. "I remember my first trip." The woman smiled. "Scared me half to death. All that space, all that sky. Thought I'd never get used to it." "Did you?" Evelyn found herself asking. "Get used to it?" "More than that. Grew to love it." The woman pulled out knitting from a carpet bag, her needles clicking with practiced rhythm. "There's a freedom out here you can't find back east. Room to breathe, room to become who you really are, not who society says you got to be." "I'm going to be married," Evelyn heard herself say. "To a rancher. I've never met him." The woman's needles paused for just a moment. "Mail order bride?" Evelyn flinched at the term, but nodded. "Ah." The clicking resumed. "That's a hard road, girl. I won't lie to you. Some men are good, decent, lonely and looking for partnership. Others—" She trailed off, and Evelyn didn't need her to finish. "But I'll tell you this. Out here, you got more say in your fate than you might think. The frontier changes women, makes us stronger. We have to be. There's no parlors to faint in, no society to catch us when we fall. We catch ourselves." "I don't know if I can be strong," Evelyn whispered. "You can be. You will be. Because you got no choice." The woman met her eyes. "What's his name, this rancher?" "Caleb Morgan. He has land near Silver Creek, Montana." The woman's expression shifted, something like surprise flickering across her features. "Morgan? Caleb Morgan?" Evelyn's heart clenched. "Do you know him?" "Not personally, but I've heard the name. We're stopping in Billings. That's not far from Silver Creek. The Morgans are one of the established families out there. Got a decent spread from what I understand." She resumed knitting, needles clicking faster now. "Could be worse, girl. Could be a lot worse." But it could also be much worse than she imagined, Evelyn thought. A man with land, with resources, with power. What would stop him from being the tyrant her mother warned her about? On the seventh day, the train began climbing into the Montana territory. The landscape transformed again, mountains rising in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The air that blew through the train windows was sharp and clean, so different from Boston's coal smoke and harbor brine. Pine forests replaced the endless prairie. Rivers ran clear and fast, cutting through ancient rock. Despite her fear, Evelyn felt something stir inside her, a tiny, fragile spark of something that might have been wonder. It was beautiful, this wild land. Terrifying, but beautiful. The train pulled into Silver Creek just after 2 in the afternoon. The town was small, a main street of perhaps 20 buildings, mostly wood construction with a few brick facades trying to suggest permanence and civilization. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a bank, a land office, a church with a white steeple. Mountains rose in every direction, and the air was so clear and thin that Evelyn felt almost dizzy stepping down onto the platform. Her legs trembled after so many days of travel. She clutched her suitcase and looked around, her heart hammering. Which one was he? The grizzled man near the freight car? The heavy-set man in the dusty suit? The young cowboy leaning against the station wall, picking his teeth with a splinter? "Miss Carter?" The voice came from behind her, and she turned. He was tall. The first thing she noticed, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders beneath a worn canvas jacket. His face was weathered by sun and wind, strong-featured but not handsome in the classical sense. His hair was dark, touched with auburn in the afternoon light, slightly too long. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale blue, like the sky on a winter morning, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected. Gentleness. "I'm Caleb Morgan," he said, and his voice was deep but soft, careful. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. I'm pleased to meet you, Miss Carter." Evelyn couldn't speak. Her mother's warnings crashed over her in waves. Submit, endure, survive. She made herself curtsy, a ridiculous Boston gesture here in this frontier town. But it was all she knew. I know this is strange, Caleb continued, and she saw him swallow hard, as nervous as she was. I know you don't know me. I know you probably don't want to be here. He took a step closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. But I want you to know something, Miss Carter. I want you to know it right now before we go any further. He met her eyes directly, and in his gaze she saw nothing of the cruelty she'd prepared for. No violence, no rage, no ownership. I'll be kind to you, Caleb Morgan said quietly. That's a promise. The words hit her like a physical force. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Kindness. He promised her kindness. It seemed impossible, a lie, a trick. Men didn't promise such things. Men took and demanded and commanded, didn't they? She found her voice at last. Thank you. He smiled then, just a little, and it transformed his face. Your trunk should be coming off the freight car soon. I've got a buggy waiting. It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. If you need anything from town first, supplies, anything personal, we can stop. No, I just want... She couldn't finish. What did she want? To run? To cry? To wake up in her Boston bedroom and find this all a nightmare? It's all right to be scared, Caleb said, and the understanding in his voice nearly undid her. I imagine I'd be terrified if I'd crossed a continent to marry a stranger. A laugh escaped her, sharp and slightly hysterical. You imagine correctly, Mr. Morgan. Caleb, he said. Please, just Caleb. Her trunk arrived and Caleb lifted it easily, carrying it to a buggy hitched behind the station. The horse was a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze, the buggy well-maintained though clearly used. Caleb helped her up with a hand that was calloused but gentle, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they drove out of Silver Creek, Evelyn stole glances at him. He handled the horse with easy competence, his movements economical and sure. His profile was strong, his jaw marked with several days of stubble that gave him a rugged appearance. He wore working clothes, canvas pants, a cotton shirt under the jacket, worn boots. A gun belt hung from his hip, the pistol looking well used but well maintained. The town's growing, Caleb said, clearly trying to make conversation. When I first came here 10 years ago, there were maybe 6 buildings. Now look at it. We've got a school now, and a real doctor. Railroad changed everything. How long have you had your ranch? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 7 years. My father died when I was 19, left me a small inheritance. I came west, bought land from a homesteader who wanted to move on to Oregon. Started with 50 head of cattle and a lot of hope. He glanced at her. Now I've got 300 head, good water rights, and 1,500 acres of decent grazing land. That sounds successful. It's a living, a good one, most years. Hard work, but honest. He paused. I don't know what you were told about me, Miss Carter. Evelyn? She interrupted, surprising herself. If I'm to call you Caleb, you should call me Evelyn. His smile was quick and genuine. Evelyn, that's a pretty name. Suits you. Heat crept into her cheeks, and she looked away, focusing on the landscape rolling past. They'd left the town behind now, following a rutted road through rolling grassland studded with pine trees. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks majestic and imposing. A hawk circled overhead, and in the distance she could see a herd of something, deer or elk, she couldn't tell which. I don't know what you were told about me, Caleb began again, but I want to be honest with you. I'm not a wealthy man. The ranch does well enough, but there's no luxury. Life is hard out here. The winters are bitter cold. The work never ends. I'm gone sometimes for days driving cattle or mending fences on the far ranges. Why did you send for a wife? The question escaped before she could stop it. Too direct, too bold. But Caleb didn't seem offended. Loneliness, mostly. I've spent 7 years building something, and I realized I was building it for no one. No family, no future. Just work for work's sake. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm 31 years old. Most men my age have wives and children by now. I wanted that. A partner. Someone to share it all with. You could have courted someone locally. There aren't many unmarried women in Silver Creek. And the few that are, he trailed off diplomatically. I wanted someone educated, someone who could talk about more than cattle and weather, someone who might bring a different perspective to this place. So you bought a wife from Boston. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Caleb pulled the buggy to a stop. They were on a small rise, the road stretching ahead toward a valley where Evelyn could see the silver ribbon of a river cutting through green grassland. He turned to face her fully. I didn't buy you, Evelyn. I paid for your passage. I settled your father's debts so you could be free of him. His voice was firm but not angry. I know how this must seem to you. I know the position you're in, married to a stranger, dependent on me for everything, far from home with no way back. That's why I made you that promise at the station. I meant every word. Men make promises, Evelyn said quietly, her mother's warnings echoing in her mind. And men break them. Some do, Caleb acknowledged. But I'm not some men. My word is the most valuable thing I own out here. Without it, I'm nothing. I can't make you trust me, Evelyn. That will take time. But I can promise you this. You'll be treated with respect in my house. You'll have say in decisions that affect you. You'll never be struck or abused. And if after a time you truly can't bear this life, I'll give you the money to return east. I won't keep you prisoner. Evelyn stared at him, searching his face for lies, for deception. But she saw only sincerity, and it terrified her almost more than cruelty would have. Cruelty she understood. Her father had taught her that lesson well. But kindness? Genuine kindness? She had no framework for that, no way to predict or protect herself from it. Why? She whispered. Why be kind when you could simply command? You have all the power here. Because commanding isn't partnership, Caleb said simply. He picked up the reins again. And partnership is what makes a life, not just a marriage. They drove on in silence, and Evelyn's mind churned. Could she believe him? Dare she hope? Or was this just a different sort of trap, kindness as a lure, drawing her in before the real nature of things revealed itself? The Morgan Ranch appeared as they crested another rise. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a wide porch, smoke curling from the chimney. Nearby stood a large barn, a stable, several outbuildings, and corrals where horses grazed. The valley spread out before them, green and beautiful, with the river running through it and mountains rising as a protective barrier on all sides. It's beautiful, Evelyn breathed, and meant it. It's home, Caleb said quietly. Or I hope it will be, for both of us. As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch. She was perhaps 50, stern-faced, wearing a practical gray dress and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. Behind her came 3 men, cowhands by their dress, who stopped their work to watch the buggy arrive. Caleb pulled to a stop and jumped down, then came around to help Evelyn descend. His hands on her waist were brief and respectful as he lifted her down. Mrs. Harwood, he called to the woman on the porch. This is Miss Evelyn Carter. Evelyn, Mrs. Harwood has been my housekeeper for 5 years. Keeps everything running smoothly. Mrs. Harwood's sharp eyes swept over Evelyn, taking in every detail of her traveling dress, her Boston manners, her city softness. The assessment was quick and clearly found Evelyn wanting. Miss Carter, Mrs. Harwood said, her tone civil but cool. Welcome to Morgan Ranch. Thank you, Evelyn managed. The 3 cowhands approached, removing their hats. Caleb made introductions. This is Jake Martinez. He's my foreman. Been with me since the beginning. That's Tom Whitfield, best horse handler in the territory. And young Sam Cooper, still learning but eager. Jake was Mexican, perhaps 40, with a weathered face and intelligent eyes. Tom was older, maybe 50, grizzled and lean. Sam was barely 20, with an open, friendly face dusted with freckles. Ma'am, they each said in turn, nodding respectfully. Evelyn nodded back, overwhelmed by all these strangers who were now, apparently, her household. I'll show you inside, Caleb said, lifting her trunk. Get you settled. We'll talk about arrangements. The inside of the house was simple but clean. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Comfortable but worn furniture sat before it. A dining table occupied the other end of the room. Doors led to what Evelyn assumed were bedrooms. There are 3 bedrooms, Caleb said, setting her trunk down. The largest is mine. The middle one I've prepared for you. The smallest is for guests, though we rarely have any. He paused, clearly uncomfortable. I thought you'd want your own space. For now, at least. Until you're more comfortable. With everything. Relief flooded through her so strongly she nearly swayed. Her own room, privacy, not immediate intimacy with a stranger. It was more consideration than she'd dared hope for. Thank you, she said quietly. Mrs. Harwood will help you get settled. I need to check on things in the barn. We've got a mare about to foal. Take your time. Rest from the journey. Supper's at 6, but if you're not ready to join us, Mrs. Harwood can bring you something in your room. He left then, and Evelyn stood in the center of this strange house, in this strange wild land, beside her trunk containing all she owned in the world, and tried not to cry. Mrs. Harwood appeared in the doorway, her expression still unreadable. Your room's through here. Evelyn followed her into a bedroom that was small but adequate. A bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a window looking out toward the mountains. No luxury, as Caleb had warned, but clean and functional. Mr. Morgan's had me preparing this room for 3 weeks, Mrs. Harwood said, opening the curtains. Wanted it ready. He's been particular about it. Wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable. It's very nice, Evelyn said carefully. Mrs. Harwood turned to face her, and her expression had softened just slightly. I'll be honest with you, Miss Carter. I had my doubts about this arrangement. A city woman coming out here, raised soft, knowing nothing about ranch life. Seemed like a recipe for disaster. Evelyn said nothing, sensing more was coming. But Mr. Morgan is a good man. Best man I've known, if I'm honest. Works harder than any 3 men I've met. Treats everyone fair, his hands, his animals, even me. She paused. He deserves a wife who'll appreciate that, who won't be looking down her nose at this life he's built. I'm not looking down on anything, Evelyn said quietly. I'm just trying to survive. Something shifted in Mrs. Harwood's eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. We're all trying to survive out here, Miss Carter. Some of us just have more practice at it than others. You'll learn, or you won't. Time will tell. She moved toward the door. Supper at 6. I assume you'll join us? Yes, Evelyn said. I will. Alone at last, Evelyn sat on the bed and allowed herself to simply breathe. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable. Through the window, she could see the valley spreading out, golden in the afternoon light. Somewhere outside, she heard men's voices, the lowing of cattle, the whinny of a horse, the sounds of a working ranch. This was her life now. This room, this house, this wild Montana valley, and the man who'd promised her kindness. Could she believe him? Could she build something here, or would she spend her life waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the cruelty she'd been warned about to finally reveal itself? She didn't know. But she was here, and there was no going back. Evelyn unpacked her trunk with shaking hands. Her few dresses, impractical for ranch life, she already knew. Her books. A miniature portrait of her mother, the only possession she'd insisted on keeping. A small jewelry box containing her grandmother's locket, her only inheritance. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in linen, was her wedding dress. White silk that her mother had worn, altered to fit Evelyn. She lifted it out, and her hands stilled. She was supposed to be married. Today. Tomorrow. Soon. To a man she'd met hours ago. The reality of it crashed over her, and this time she couldn't hold back the tears. She cried silently, not wanting anyone to hear, pressing the silk dress to her face to muffle the sound. She cried for her lost life, for her stolen choices, for the fear that lived in her chest like a trapped bird. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she carefully folded the dress and put it in the bottom drawer of the dresser. When 6 o'clock came, Evelyn washed her face with the cold water in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and pinned her hair up with hands that barely trembled. She would not hide in her room like a frightened child. She would face this new life with whatever courage she could muster. She would survive. The main room was filled with the smell of food when she emerged, stew from the smell of it, and fresh bread. Mrs. Harwood was setting the table. The 3 cowhands were washing up at a basin near the door, and Caleb stood by the window looking out toward the darkening valley. He turned when she entered, and his face brightened. "Evelyn, I'm glad you decided to join us. I hope you found the room acceptable?" "Very acceptable, thank you. Sit, please." He pulled out a chair at the head of the table, but indicated the seat beside it for her. "We're informal here. Everyone eats together." The meal was simple but filling. Mrs. Harwood's beef stew was rich and well-seasoned, the bread warm and crusty. Conversation flowed around Evelyn, talk of cattle and water rights, fences that needed mending, a foal that had been successfully birthed just that afternoon. The men included Caleb in the conversation naturally, asking his opinion, sharing their observations, clearly respecting his judgment. Evelyn ate quietly, observing. Caleb treated the men like equals, valued their input. There was easy camaraderie among them, built on years of working together. Even Mrs. Harwood joined the conversation occasionally, and Caleb listened to her with the same respect he showed the men. "What do you think, Evelyn?" She looked up, startled. Caleb was looking at her expectantly. "I'm sorry, We were discussing whether to extend the east pasture or improve irrigation on the current grazing land. You've been educated. What does logic suggest?" They were all looking at her now, and she felt heat creep up her neck. I don't know anything about ranching." "No, but you know about resources and investment. Which makes more sense, expand what you have or improve what you already own?" It was a test, perhaps, or genuine curiosity. Either way, she considered the question seriously. "I would think improvement of existing resources would be more sustainable than constant expansion. Expansion requires more labor, more maintenance, more everything. Improvement of what you have makes what you have more valuable." Jake nodded slowly. "The lady's got a point, boss." "She does," Caleb agreed, and his smile was warm. "Improvement it is, then. We'll focus on irrigation this winter." The conversation moved on, but Evelyn felt something shift inside her. He'd asked her opinion, valued it. In front of his men, he'd given her voice weight. It was such a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. After supper, the men retired to the bunkhouse and Mrs. Harwood to her small cottage behind the main house. Caleb and Evelyn were left alone in the gathering dusk, and the sudden intimacy of it made Evelyn's pulse quicken with renewed anxiety. Caleb seemed to sense her discomfort. He moved to the fireplace, adding logs, keeping distance between them. "I thought we should talk," he said quietly. "About expectations. About what happens next." Evelyn perched on the edge of a chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't expect anything from you," Caleb continued, staring into the growing flames. "Not yet. Not until you're ready. I know this is all strange and frightening. I know I'm a stranger to you." He turned to face her. "But I hope in time we can become friends, and maybe, eventually, more than that." "You'll want heirs," Evelyn said, forcing the words out. "I understand that's part of the arrangement." "Eventually, yes. I'd like children someday, but not—" He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "Not until there's genuine feeling between us. Not until you want that too." "I'm not going to force anything, Evelyn. I hope you understand that." "Men have rights," she whispered. "As husbands, legal rights." "I don't care about legal rights." His voice was firm. "I care about doing what's right, and what's right is giving you time, giving us both time." Evelyn looked up at him, this tall, weathered stranger who kept saying impossible things. "Why?" she asked again, the same question from earlier. "Why be different? Why not just—" "Because I saw my mother suffer," Caleb said quietly, and pain flickered across his face. "My father wasn't a bad man, but he was hard, demanding. He treated my mother like property, like something he owned. I watched her wilt over the years, watched her spirit dim. When she died, I swore I'd never do that to a woman, that if I ever married, it would be partnership, not ownership." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said softly, "about your mother." "So am I." He turned back to the fire. "Tomorrow, I'll show you around the ranch, introduce you to the rhythms of life here. You don't have to work. I don't expect that, but I think you'll be happier if you find purpose here, something that's yours." "I'd like that," Evelyn heard herself say. "I don't want to be useless." "You could never be useless." Caleb's voice was warm. Now, you must be exhausted from your journey. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day. Evelyn stood, and impulsively, before she could stop herself, she said, "Thank you, Caleb, for your kindness. I know I don't fully trust it yet, but thank you. You're welcome, Evelyn. Good night." Good night. In her room, Evelyn prepared for bed by lamplight. She changed into her nightgown, brushed out her hair, performed all the familiar rituals. But everything felt different now. The sounds outside her window were strange. Not Boston's carriages and harbor bells, but wind in pines and the distant call of a coyote. She climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind too full for sleep. He'd promised kindness. He'd given her space. He'd asked her opinion. Small things, perhaps, but to her they were miracles. Could she dare to hope? Could she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be the prison sentence she'd feared? Outside her window, the Montana night deepened. Stars blazed in the clear sky, more stars than she'd ever imagined existed. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and grass and possibility. Somewhere in the house, she heard Caleb's footsteps as he retired to his own room. The sound was oddly comforting. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future here. Tried to imagine partnership instead of ownership. Tried to imagine kindness as a foundation instead of an illusion. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, for the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of prisons and chains. She dreamed of stars. Morning came too early, announced by a rooster's crow that shattered Evelyn's fitful sleep. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling, the quality of light through rough curtains, the absolute silence broken only by birdsong. Then memory crashed back. Montana, the ranch, Caleb Morgan, and his impossible promise of kindness. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, though even her simplest gown was wholly impractical for ranch life with its tight bodice and layers of petticoats. In the small mirror above the washstand, her reflection looked pale and uncertain, dark circles beneath her eyes testament to her troubled sleep. The main room was already alive with activity when she emerged. Mrs. Harwood worked at the stove, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the air. Through the window, Evelyn could see Caleb and his men already at work in the corrals, their movements purposeful in the golden morning light. "Coffee?" Mrs. Harwood asked, not unkindly. "Yes, please." Evelyn's voice came out scratchy with sleep. The housekeeper poured a cup of dark, strong coffee and set it before her. "Breakfast will be ready shortly. The men eat at dawn, but Mr. Morgan said to let you sleep. Said you'd need the rest after such a journey." Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold. "That was kind of him." "Kindness is his nature," Mrs. Harwood said, cracking eggs into a skillet. "Though I expect you'll need to see it to believe it, coming from where you came from." "You know about Boston? About why I'm here?" "I know enough. Know your father sold you to settle debts. Know you had no choice in the matter." Mrs. Harwood flipped the eggs with practiced efficiency. "Know Mr. Morgan paid more than he should have because he wanted to free you from a bad situation, not create a new one." Evelyn stared into her coffee, emotions warring inside her. Gratitude mixed with resentment, grateful for Caleb's intentions, resentful that she'd needed saving at all, that she'd been treated as property by the man who should have protected her. "He could have gotten a wife for less," Mrs. Harwood continued. "Could have found some desperate widow or orphaned girl who'd have jumped at the chance for security. Instead, he specifically looked for someone educated, someone trapped by circumstance rather than poverty. Said he wanted someone who'd be his equal, not his servant." "Why are you telling me this?" Evelyn asked quietly. Mrs. Harwood set a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread before her. "Because I see you waiting for the other shoe to drop, see you bracing for cruelty. And I'm telling you straight, it won't come. Not from Mr. Morgan. He's been nothing but decent to me since my husband died and left me with nothing. Gave me work, gave me respect, never once tried to take advantage, though God knows he could have." She met Evelyn's eyes directly. "What I'm saying is you can trust him, but that's something you'll have to learn for yourself." The door opened and Caleb entered, bringing with him the smell of horses and hay and morning air. His face was already dusty from work, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned, muscular forearms. "Good morning," he said, smiling at Evelyn. I hope you slept well? Well enough, thank you. He poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the table, easy and comfortable in his own space. I thought after breakfast, if you're feeling up to it, I'd show you around properly, introduce you to the place. No expectations, just familiarization. I'd like that, Evelyn said, and realized she meant it. They set out an hour later, after Caleb had given instructions to his men for the day's work. He'd saddled 2 horses, a gentle gray mare for Evelyn and his own rangy bay gelding. Evelyn eyed the side saddle with trepidation. I haven't ridden much, she admitted. Just a few times in Boston, in parks. Ginny here is the gentlest creature you'll ever meet, Caleb assured her, patting the mare's neck. She's patient with beginners. I'll help you up. His hands on her waist, as he lifted her into the saddle, were brief and respectful, but Evelyn still felt heat rush to her face at the contact. She settled herself, adjusting her skirts, feeling ungainly and exposed. Just relax, Caleb said, handing her the reins. Let her feel that you trust her. She'll take care of you. They rode out slowly, Caleb keeping his horse close to hers, ready to assist if needed, but Ginny was indeed gentle, her gait smooth and unhurried. As they left the immediate ranch compound, Evelyn began to relax into the rhythm, even to enjoy the sensation of movement and height. The ranch spread out before them in the clear morning light. Caleb pointed out landmarks. The river that provided their water, curving silver through the valley. The line of cottonwoods marking the property's eastern boundary. The far pastures where cattle grazed, small dark shapes against the green. 1,500 acres, Caleb said, pride evident in his voice. Most of it grazing land, but we've got timber stands too, and good water rights. The river never runs dry, even in the worst summers. How did you know this was the right place? Evelyn asked. When you first came here? Caleb was quiet for a moment, gazing out over his land. I felt it. I know that sounds foolish, but when I crested that ridge, he pointed to a rise to the north, and saw this valley for the first time, I knew this was where I was meant to build something lasting. They rode along the river, and Caleb told her about the land's history, how it had been Crow territory once, before the treaties and relocations, how the first white settlers had struggled and many had failed, how he'd bought the property from a man named Henderson who'd given up after his wife died in childbirth, unable to bear the loneliness and the memories. There's ghosts here, Caleb said quietly. Not literal ones, but the echoes of people who tried and failed. Sometimes I think about them, wonder about their stories. Henderson's wife is buried on that hill. He gestured toward a gentle rise marked by a solitary pine. He left the day after he buried her. Couldn't stand to stay, couldn't stand to go. That kind of grief breaks a person. It's sad, Evelyn said softly. It is. But it's also a reminder. Life out here is hard, unforgiving. People need each other to survive it. That's why I wanted... He stopped himself, seeming suddenly embarrassed. Why you wanted a wife, Evelyn finished for him. Why I wanted a partner, he corrected gently. Someone to share both the burdens and the beauty. They rode on, and gradually Evelyn began to see what he meant about beauty. The way morning light gilded the grasslands. The sudden flight of an eagle from a riverside tree, wings spanning impossibly wide. Wildflowers dotting the meadows in riots of color. Indian paintbrush and lupine and flowers she had no names for. They stopped at a vantage point overlooking the entire valley, and Caleb dismounted, then helped Evelyn down. Her legs trembled slightly from the unaccustomed exercise, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. This is my favorite spot, he said. Come up here sometimes just to think, to remember why I'm working so hard. From this height, Evelyn could see the whole ranch laid out below. The house and outbuildings, the corrals and pastures, the river threading through it all, the mountains rising in protective embrace on every side. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. So different from Boston's brick and harbor, so wild and vast and alive. It's overwhelming, she admitted. I know. Took me months to feel like I understood even a fraction of it, but you will. Given time, you'll learn to read this land, know its moods and seasons. He glanced at her. If you stay. The unspoken question hung between them. Would she stay? Could she build a life here, so far from everything she'd known? Tell me about your family, Evelyn said instead of answering. You mentioned your mother, but nothing else. Caleb's expression grew shadowed. Not much to tell that's pleasant. My father was a merchant in St. Louis, moderately successful but never satisfied, always chasing the next deal, the next opportunity. My mother was from a good family, educated, refined. She married beneath her, according to her parents, but she loved him. He paused, clearly gathering difficult memories. For years it was fine. Then my father's business started failing. He made bad investments, trusted the wrong partners. As his circumstances worsened, so did his temper. He never struck her. I'll give him that. But his words were weapons. He blamed her for everything, for not bringing enough dowry, for bearing him only one son, for being a burden instead of an asset. How old were you? Evelyn asked softly. 15 when it started getting really bad. 17 when my mother got sick. She just faded. The doctors called it consumption, but I think she died of a broken heart, of years of being told she was worthless. His voice was rough with old pain. My father died 6 months later. Drank himself to death, essentially. Left me with just enough money to start over somewhere else. And you came here. I came here, determined to build something different, something good, something that wouldn't be tainted by bitterness and failure. He turned to her. That's why I made you that promise, Evelyn, because I saw what happens when kindness dies in a marriage. I won't let that happen. Not in my house. Not to someone under my protection. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. I'm sorry for what you endured, for what your mother suffered. Don't be sorry. Just understand why I do things the way I do. Why I'll never raise my voice to you in anger. Why I'll never make you feel small or worthless. Because I know what that does to a person. They stood in silence, the wind whispering through the grass around them. Evelyn felt something shift in her understanding of this man. He wasn't just being kind for kindness' sake. He was actively fighting against the demons of his past, determined to create something better. My mother told me to submit, Evelyn said quietly, to endure, to never fight back no matter what. She thought she was preparing me for survival. She was teaching you what she'd learned, Caleb said. Can't fault her for that. But you don't have to submit here, Evelyn. You can speak your mind. Disagree with me. Fight with me if you need to. Not physically, but with words, with ideas. That's what partnership means. I don't know if I know how, she admitted. I've spent my whole life being quiet, being obedient, being invisible. Then you'll learn. We'll learn together. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both of them absorbed in their thoughts. As they approached the barn, Evelyn saw a rider coming up the road from town, a tall man on a black horse moving fast. Caleb saw him too, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. That's Ronan Maddox, my neighbor to the west. Is something wrong? Evelyn asked, sensing tension in Caleb's suddenly rigid posture. Maddox has been trying to buy my water rights for 2 years. I've refused. He doesn't take refusal well. They reached the barn as Maddox pulled his horse to a stop. He was an imposing figure, taller even than Caleb, with iron-gray hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the hardness in his eyes. He wore expensive clothes, his horse was prime stock, and his saddle gleamed with silver trim. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power. Morgan, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Then his eyes found Evelyn, and something predatory flickered in them. And who's this? My wife, Caleb said flatly, and Evelyn noted he didn't use her name. What do you want, Maddox? Your wife? Well, congratulations. Maddox's smile didn't reach his eyes. Didn't think you had it in you to catch yourself a refined lady. Must have cost you pretty. Evelyn felt Caleb tense beside her, but his voice remained level. State your business or ride on. My business is the same as always, Morgan. Water. My herds are growing. I need more grazing land, and that means I need access to the river. Your river. He leaned forward in his saddle. I'm prepared to offer you $3,000 for the water rights to your eastern sections. And I'm prepared to refuse, same as the last 5 times you've asked. That's not wise, Morgan. I'm being generous here. You're being greedy. You've got your own water sources. They're just not as convenient as mine. Maddox's expression darkened. Everything changes, Morgan. Circumstances change. A man with a wife now has more to protect, more to lose, might make him more reasonable. It was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Evelyn felt ice slide down her spine. This was the sort of man she understood, the sort who used power to intimidate, who saw others as obstacles to be removed. "My circumstances haven't changed my answer," Caleb said coldly. "Now get off my land." For a moment, Maddox just stared at him, and the tension was thick enough to cut. Then he smiled again, that dead smile that held no warmth. "We'll talk again, Morgan, when you're feeling more reasonable, ma'am." He tipped his hat mockingly to Evelyn, wheeled his horse, and galloped away. Caleb watched him go, his jaw tight. Jake and Tom had emerged from the barn during the exchange, and they stood now with hands resting on their guns, ready to back Caleb if needed. "That man is trouble," Jake said quietly. "That man is a problem that's getting worse," Caleb agreed. "Tom, I want someone watching the eastern fence line from now on. He's got men who aren't above cutting wire or running off stock." "You think he'd go that far?" Evelyn asked. Caleb turned to her, and she saw worry in his eyes. "Maddox thinks this whole valley should be his. He's got the biggest spread, the most money, the most influence in town. The only thing he doesn't have is my water rights, and it eats at him. He's not a man who accepts limitations." "What will you do?" "What I've been doing. Hold my ground, protect what's mine." He glanced at her. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Sorry you're now part of this situation." "But I'm your wife," Evelyn said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "That makes it my situation too." Something warm flickered in Caleb's eyes. "So it does. Come on, let's get these horses settled. You did well today, by the way. Real well for your first long ride." The rest of the day passed in a rhythm Evelyn was beginning to recognize. The men worked, mending fences, checking cattle, training horses. Mrs. Harwood managed the house with quiet efficiency, and Evelyn tried to find her place in it all, helping where she could, learning the patterns of ranch life. That evening, after supper, Caleb pulled out maps and ledgers, spreading them across the dining table. "Come look at this," he said to Evelyn. "I want to show you something." She came to stand beside him, looking down at the hand-drawn map of the property. He'd marked everything: fence lines, water sources, grazing rotations, timber stands. "This is the eastern section Maddox wants," Caleb said, pointing to an area along the river. "It's the best grazing land I have. If I sold the water rights, his cattle would overgraze it within 2 years. The land would be ruined, the river polluted. It's not just about keeping something from him, it's about protecting the land itself." "So it's about stewardship," Evelyn said, understanding. "Exactly. This land will be here long after I'm gone. I want to leave it better than I found it, not stripped bare for short-term profit." He looked at her. "That's why I can't sell to him. Why I won't, no matter what pressure he applies." "What kind of pressure can he apply?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. "He's got influence in town. Sits on the bank board, has the sheriff in his pocket. He could make things difficult. Deny me credit, interfere with shipping my cattle, turn a blind eye if things happen on my property. That's not legal. Legality means different things out here. We're still frontier, Evelyn, civilized veneer over something much rawer. Men like Maddox make their own rules when they can get away with it." Evelyn studied the maps, tracing the river's course with her finger. "What about allies? Are there other ranchers who feel the same way? Who might stand with you against Maddox?" Caleb looked at her with something like surprise. "There are a few, smaller operations like mine, but they're scattered and most are afraid of Maddox. Fear is understandable, but there's strength in numbers." Evelyn's education was finally useful for something. If you could organize them, present a united front, Maddox would have a harder time picking you off one by one. "You've got a strategic mind," Caleb said, impressed. "I had tutors in history and philosophy. Strategy was part of both." She felt a small surge of pride that her education, so often dismissed as ornamental, might actually be valuable here. "Then I'll want your help," Caleb said decisively. "I've been fighting this alone, but you're right. Time to build alliances." They worked late into the evening, and Evelyn felt something unexpected blooming inside her. Purpose. Usefulness. She wasn't just a burden or an ornament here. She could contribute. Her mind, her education, her perspective were valued. When they finally retired for the night, Caleb paused outside her bedroom door. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for today, for listening, for offering ideas. It means more than you might think." "Thank you for including me," Evelyn replied, "for treating my thoughts as valuable." "They are valuable. You are valuable." He smiled, that gentle smile that transformed his weathered face. "Sleep well, Evelyn." "You too, Caleb." In her room, Evelyn prepared for bed with a lighter heart than she'd had since leaving Boston. The day had been full: the ride, the confrontation with Maddox, the strategy session with Caleb. But more than that, it had been full of small kindnesses. Caleb's patience teaching her to ride, his openness about his past, his genuine interest in her ideas. Maybe, she thought as she climbed into bed, maybe her mother had been wrong. Maybe not all men were tyrants waiting to reveal their cruelty. Maybe some, like Caleb, were exactly what they appeared to be. It was a dangerous hope, but it was hope nonetheless. The next few days fell into a pattern. Mornings found Evelyn riding out with Caleb, learning the land, meeting the cattle, understanding the rhythms of the ranch. Afternoons she spent with Mrs. Harwood, learning practical skills, how to preserve food, how to manage supplies, how to treat common injuries and illnesses. Evenings were for planning and discussion, Caleb teaching her about ranch management while she offered perspectives from her education. On the fourth day, Caleb announced they'd be riding into town. "We need supplies, and I want to introduce you to people. Let them know you're here, that you're my wife." Evelyn dressed carefully in her best day dress, aware that she'd be on display, that judgments would be made. The ride into Silver Creek took an hour, and Caleb filled the time with stories about the town's residents, who was fair, who was trouble, who could be trusted. "The doctor is Seth Richardson. Good man, knows his business. The banker is Walter Spence, Maddox's friend, so be careful around him. The general store is run by Martha and Henry Chen. They came from San Francisco 5 years ago, faced a lot of prejudice at first, but they proved themselves valuable to the community." Silver Creek was busy when they arrived, the main street full of wagons and horses and people going about their business. Caleb helped Evelyn down from the buggy and offered his arm. They walked together down the boardwalk, and Evelyn felt eyes on her, curious, assessing, judging. Their first stop was the general store. The Chens were a middle-aged couple, warm and welcoming despite the initial wariness in their eyes when they saw Evelyn's fine clothes. "Mr. Morgan," Martha Chen said, smiling. "Good to see you, and this must be the wife we've heard about." "This is Evelyn," Caleb said proudly. "Evelyn, Martha, and Henry Chen, best storekeepers in the territory." "Pleased to meet you," Evelyn said, offering her hand. Martha shook it, her grip firm. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Mrs. Morgan. I hope you'll be happy here." "I hope so too," Evelyn said honestly. They spent an hour in the store, Caleb consulting with Evelyn about supplies, asking her preferences, treating the mundane task of shopping as a joint decision rather than a chore to be hurried through. Evelyn found herself relaxing, even enjoying the normalcy of it. As they were loading their purchases into the buggy, a woman approached. She was perhaps 60, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes and an assessing expression. "Caleb Morgan," she said, her voice carrying authority. "Introduce me to your bride." "Mrs. Thornton," Caleb said with genuine warmth. "Evelyn, this is Eleanor Thornton. She runs the school here and is the closest thing Silver Creek has to a civic leader." "Mrs. Morgan." Eleanor Thornton's examination was thorough, but not unkind. "I heard about you from Martha. Boston bred, educated, far from home." "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn said, feeling like a student under scrutiny. "We can use educated women out here. Too many children growing up barely literate because their parents don't value learning." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I could use help at the school if you're interested. Just a few hours a week. Teach the older girls some refinement, perhaps. Literature. History." Evelyn looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that very much," she said. "Good. Come by next week and we'll discuss it." Eleanor turned to Caleb. "You chose well, young man. Now keep her safe. I heard about Maddox's visit to your ranch. That man is a viper." "I'm aware," Caleb said grimly. "Be more than aware. Be vigilant." Eleanor's voice dropped. He's been talking in town, saying things, implying that you're standing in the way of progress, that your stubbornness about water rights is hurting everyone. He's building a narrative, Caleb. Be careful. They parted ways, and Evelyn saw worry deepen in Caleb's expression. She's right, he said quietly as they climbed back into the buggy. Maddox is smart. He won't just come at me directly. He'll turn public opinion first. Then we need to counter his narrative, Evelyn said. Show that you're protecting the land for everyone's long-term benefit, not just being stubborn. How? Evelyn thought fast, her mind working through possibilities. Mrs. Thornton mentioned helping at the school. What if we did more? What if we made the ranch a resource for the community, offered to teach better land management practices, shared your success with smaller ranchers, made it clear that your water rights protect not just your land, but the whole valley's future? Caleb stared at her. That's brilliant. Turn his greed into my stewardship. Make it about community versus individual profit. Exactly. He impulsively took her hand, squeezed it. I knew you were smart. I knew you'd be an asset. But Evelyn, you're more than that. You're... He trailed off, seeming suddenly aware of the intimacy of holding her hand. He released it, but gently. Sorry, I didn't mean to presume. It's all right, Evelyn said softly, and meant it. His touch hadn't felt threatening. It had felt warm, genuine. They drove back to the ranch in companionable silence, and Evelyn realized that for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt something like contentment. She had purpose here, value, and maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to feel like she had a partner. That night, Caleb called a meeting with his men. They gathered in the barn, and Caleb laid out the situation with Maddox, explaining the growing threat. We need to be prepared, he said seriously. I don't think Maddox will resort to violence right away. He's too smart for that, doesn't want to risk his reputation. But he'll probe our defenses, test us. We need to be vigilant. I can ride fence every night, Jake offered. Make sure nobody's cutting wire or running off stock. I'll take the day shifts, Tom added. Young Sam spoke up, his voice uncertain but determined. I'm not much in a fight, boss, but I can watch. I'm good at watching. Nothing gets past me. Good, Caleb said. We'll set up a rotation, and Evelyn, he turned to her, and all the men turned too, has suggested we start building alliances with other small ranchers. Make this about more than just us versus Maddox. The men nodded approvingly, and Evelyn felt a surge of pride that they respected Caleb's respect for her ideas. The meeting broke up, but Jake lingered. Boss, can I speak plain? Always. Mrs. Morgan being here changes things, makes you a target in a different way. Maddox is the kind of man who'll use any leverage he can find. Jake's expression was troubled. Just saying, watch her close. Don't let her ride out alone. Maddox has men who aren't particular about honor. Caleb's face went hard. I know. I've been thinking the same thing. He looked at Evelyn. No more riding alone. Anywhere. One of us goes with you. Always. Evelyn wanted to protest. She'd just begun to feel free, but she saw the genuine fear in Caleb's eyes and nodded. I understand. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn heard the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. The men's voices from the bunkhouse, the stamp of horses in the stable, the lonely call of a coyote from the hills, and beneath it all, the constant whisper of the river, life-giving and eternal. She thought about Maddox and his threats, about the danger that now shadowed their lives, about Caleb's determination to protect what was his, including, now, her. It should have frightened her. And part of her was frightened, but another part, a part she was just beginning to discover, felt something else entirely. She felt ready to fight. The readiness to fight that Evelyn had discovered within herself was tested sooner than she'd anticipated. 3 days after their trip to town, she woke before dawn to the sound of shouting and the thunder of hooves. She threw on a robe and rushed to the window, her heart pounding, and saw Caleb and his men racing toward the eastern pastures, silhouetted against the pre-dawn gray. Mrs. Harwood appeared in her doorway, already dressed, her face grim. Trouble with the cattle. Get dressed proper, girl. We might be needed. Evelyn dressed with shaking hands, pulling on the most practical dress she owned, though even that felt absurdly restrictive for whatever emergency awaited. By the time she reached the main room, Mrs. Harwood had coffee ready and was packing supplies into saddlebags with the efficiency of long practice. "What's happening?" Evelyn asked. "Won't know until the men get back, but if I had to guess, someone's been at the herd. Maddox's work most likely, though proving it's another matter." They waited as the sun rose, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber that seemed cruelly beautiful given the tension coiling in Evelyn's stomach. An hour passed. 2. Finally, riders appeared on the ridge, Caleb and his men returning, and even from a distance Evelyn could see the fury in their postures. They rode hard into the yard, and Caleb dismounted with barely controlled violence, his face dark with rage. 20 head, he said, his voice tight. "Just gone. And 3 more dead, shot and left to rot." "Maddox?" Mrs. Harwood asked. "Who else? But the bastard was smart about it. No tracks leading to his property, no witnesses, just dead cattle and missing stock that will probably show up at market in Billings with altered brands." Jake dismounted more slowly, favoring his left side. Blood seeped through his shirt, and Evelyn rushed forward without thinking. "You're hurt." "Just a graze, ma'am. Found one of Maddox's men still on our property. There was an exchange of gunfire before he got away." "Inside," Evelyn said, her voice brooking no argument. She'd been learning from Mrs. Harwood about frontier medicine, and now she was grateful for it. "Mrs. Harwood, I'll need hot water and clean cloth." In the house, she worked to clean and bandage Jake's wound while Caleb paced like a caged animal, fury radiating from him in waves. The bullet had indeed only grazed Jake's ribs, but it could have been so much worse. "This is war," Tom said quietly, standing by the window as if watching for more attacks. "Maddox has declared it, whether we wanted it or not." "Then we respond," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm now, which was somehow more frightening than his anger. "But we do it smart. We document everything. We ride to the sheriff, file a report, make sure there's a legal record even if the sheriff's in Maddox's pocket." "The sheriff won't do anything," Sam said, his young face troubled. "Probably not, but we create a paper trail. Evidence. So that when this escalates, and it will, we have documentation of Maddox's aggression." Caleb looked at Evelyn, who was tying off Jake's bandage. "You all right?" "I'm fine. Jake will be fine too, though he needs to rest that side for a few days." "No rest," Jake said stubbornly. "We're short-handed as it is." "You'll rest today at least," Evelyn said firmly. "Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor," Jake pointed out, but there was respect in his voice. "No, but I'm the closest thing to one right now, and you'll listen to me." Jake looked at Caleb, who nodded. "Listen to her. She's right. You're no good to us if you reopen that wound and bleed out." Caleb spent the day in town filing reports and talking to other ranchers. He returned at dusk looking tired and frustrated. "The sheriff took my statement but made it clear he won't investigate without more evidence. Said cattle wander off all the time, that the dead ones could have been shot by anyone. As for Jake being shot at, without a witness who can identify the shooter, there's nothing he can do." "Convenient," Evelyn said bitterly. "Very." Caleb sat heavily at the table, and Evelyn poured him coffee without asking. He took it gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "But I did talk to 3 other small ranchers. They've all had similar problems, missing stock, cut fences, fires of mysterious origin. They're all scared of Maddox, but they're also tired of being victims. I invited them here next week for a meeting." "That's good," Evelyn said. "That's a start. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just putting more people in danger." He looked at her, and she saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if I should just sell to him, take the money, and start over somewhere else. It would be easier." "Easier isn't always right," Evelyn said quietly. She surprised herself by reaching out, putting her hand over his on the table. "You're fighting for something that matters, for the land, for the principle that bullies shouldn't win. That means something, Caleb." He turned his hand under hers, gripping her fingers. "When did you get so brave?" "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified. But I've decided that fear isn't a good enough reason to give up." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. Then Mrs. Harwood bustled in with supper, and the moment broke, but something had shifted between them. Something deeper than partnership. Something that felt dangerously like trust. The following days were tense, everyone waiting for the next attack. Caleb doubled the guard rotations, and nobody rode out alone. Evelyn found herself confined to the immediate ranch compound, and while she understood the necessity, she chafed at the restriction. She'd just begun to feel free, and now she was caged again, albeit in a much larger and more beautiful cage. To occupy herself, she threw herself into preparations for the ranchers' meeting. She helped Caleb draft a proposal for cooperative land management, drew up documents outlining water-sharing agreements, created a framework for mutual defense. Her education in history and philosophy proved invaluable. She understood how alliances were built, how common cause could unite disparate parties. "You should have been a lawyer," Caleb said one evening, reviewing her work with obvious admiration. "This is better than anything I could have drafted." "Women can't be lawyers," Evelyn said without bitterness, just stating fact. "That's a damn shame. You've got a mind for it." The night before the meeting, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the house settle, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. What if the other ranchers didn't come? What if they did come but refused to stand together? What if Maddox found out about the meeting and retaliated? A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Yes?" "It's Caleb. Can I come in? I promise I'm being proper. Just can't sleep and saw your light under the door." "Yes, come in." He entered, fully dressed still, carrying a lamp. In its flickering light, he looked exhausted, shadows deep under his eyes. "I keep thinking about tomorrow, about what happens if this fails." "And what happens if it succeeds?" Evelyn countered. "You can't only imagine failure, Caleb." "Success might be worse. If we actually organize against Maddox, he'll see it as a declaration of war. Things will escalate. People could get hurt. You could get hurt." His voice broke slightly on the last words. Evelyn climbed out of bed, pulling her robe tighter, and crossed to him. "I could get hurt staying silent, too. Maddox won't stop at taking your water rights. Men like him never stop. They keep taking until there's nothing left to take. You know that." "I know, I just—" He stopped, struggling with something. "I brought you here promising safety, promising kindness, and instead I've pulled you into a war. You didn't start this war. Maddox did." Evelyn found herself reaching up, touching his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. It was an intimate gesture, one she hadn't planned, but it felt right. "And I'd rather fight beside you than cower in Boston under my father's tyranny. At least here, I have choice. I choose to stand with you." Caleb's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it to his cheek. "You're remarkable. You know that? In just a few weeks, you've become essential to this place. To me." Their faces were close now, close enough that Evelyn could feel his breath, could see the flecks of darker blue in his pale eyes. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and she realized she wanted him to. But instead, he gently removed her hand from his face, though he held it for a moment longer. "I should let you sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's important. We both need to be sharp." "Caleb, good night, Evelyn." He retreated to the door, then paused. "Thank you for choosing to stand with me. It means more than I can say." Then he was gone, and Evelyn was left alone with her racing heart and the echo of almost happened moments. She climbed back into bed, but didn't sleep for a long time, her fingers still tingling from where he'd held them. The next morning dawned clear and cold, autumn's first serious chill in the air. Evelyn dressed carefully in one of her better dresses. She wanted to look respectable, educated, someone these ranchers would take seriously. Mrs. Harwood prepared food for what they hoped would be a crowd, and the men cleaned the barn where the meeting would be held. The ranchers began arriving just after noon. First came Thomas Brennan, a weathered Irishman with 3 sons and a failing homestead. Then Margaret Sullivan, a widow who'd been running her late husband's ranch for 2 years with more determination than resources. Others followed, Daniel Ortega with his quiet dignity, the Johansson brothers with their thick Swedish accents, Mary and Robert Fletcher, and their teenage daughter, old Henry Baxter, who'd been ranching in the valley longer than anyone. 8 families in all, representing perhaps a fifth of the valley's small ranchers. Not everyone Caleb had invited, but enough. Enough to matter. Caleb welcomed them into the barn, which had been swept clean and furnished with benches and hay bales for seating. Evelyn stood beside him, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny. A Boston woman in her fine dress, What could she possibly understand about their struggles? Thank you all for coming, Caleb began. I know it took courage, knowing that Maddox has eyes everywhere, knowing that being here might make you targets. But I believe we're targets already. We're just alone in our targeting. I want to propose we change that. He laid out the situation clearly. Maddox's aggression, the pattern of attacks against small ranchers, the sheriff's refusal to act, the town officials in Maddox's pocket. The ranchers nodded grimly, recognizing their own experiences in his words. We can fight him individually and fail, Caleb continued. Or we can stand together. Make it clear that attacking one of us means attacking all of us. Create agreements that legally bind us to mutual defense and support. And most importantly, make our case to the territorial governor over the heads of Maddox's local influence. Pretty words, Thomas Brennan said, his Irish accent thick. But how does standing together stop bullets? How does it replace stolen cattle or mend cut fences? It doesn't, Evelyn spoke up, surprising even herself. All eyes turned to her. Not directly, but it creates accountability. Right now, Maddox acts with impunity because he knows we'll suffer in silence, too afraid or too proud to admit we need help. If we document everything, share information, support each other publicly, we create witnesses, we create records. We make it impossible for him to operate in shadows. She's got a point, Margaret Sullivan said. I've been keeping quiet about my troubles, too ashamed to admit I couldn't handle things alone. But that silence serves him, not us. Exactly, Caleb said. We're going to draw up formal agreements today. Water sharing arrangements so if one of us has drought or contamination, others can help. Defense pacts, if one ranch is attacked, others respond. And information sharing. Everything that happens, we document and share with the whole group. And what's to stop Maddox from just attacking all of us at once? Henry Baxter asked, his voice cracked with age and skepticism. Numbers, Caleb said simply. And witnesses. At least fighting gives us a chance. There was silence as everyone considered this. Then Margaret Sullivan stood. I'm in. I've got nothing left to lose anyway. Might as well go down fighting. I'm in too, said one of the Johansson brothers. We don't run from bullies in the old country. We don't run here either. One by one, they committed. Not everyone. The Fletchers ultimately decided the risk was too great with a young daughter to protect, and old Henry Baxter said he was too tired for war at his age. But 6 families stood firm, ready to make a stand. They spent the rest of the afternoon hammering out details. Evelyn took notes, drafted agreements, helped resolve disputes over water rights and boundary issues. Her education, her ability to see patterns and create structure, proved invaluable. These were good people, but they were ranchers, not lawyers or organizers. They needed someone who could translate their intent into formal documentation. By evening, they had a framework. Not perfect, but solid. A confederation of small ranchers committed to mutual support and defense. They called it the Silver Creek Valley Association, and they elected Caleb as their spokesman, their representative in any dealings with authorities or with Maddox. As the families prepared to leave, Margaret Sullivan pulled Evelyn aside. You're not what I expected, she said bluntly. What did you expect? Some fragile city flower who'd wilt at the first harsh wind. Instead, you're standing there drafting legal documents and talking strategy like you were born to it. Margaret's weathered face softened into something like respect. Don't underestimate yourself, Mrs. Morgan. You've got steel in you. You're going to need it. After everyone left, Caleb and Evelyn stood in the yard watching the sun set over the mountains. Exhaustion and elation warring within them. They'd done it. They'd built something real, something that might actually make a difference. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. None of that would have worked without you. You made them believe it was possible. We made them believe, Evelyn corrected. You gave them courage. I just gave them paperwork. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine despite the exhaustion in it. Essential paperwork. Don't diminish what you did today, Evelyn. You were magnificent. They stood in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and Evelyn realized she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just purpose or usefulness, but genuine partnership. She and Caleb were building something together, fighting for something together. It wasn't the marriage she'd imagined as a girl, no romantic courtship, no grand declarations. but it was real in a way that felt more valuable than romance. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. On the third morning after the meeting, young Sam came racing in from the eastern pastures, his horse lathered with sweat, his face white with fear. "Fire!" he shouted. "The east pasture is burning." Evelyn watched from the porch as Caleb and his men grabbed equipment and rode out at a gallop. Smoke was already visible on the horizon, a dark column rising into the clear autumn sky. Mrs. Harwood appeared beside her, her face grim. "This is it," the housekeeper said. "Maddox's answer to your meeting. He's declaring war." The men fought the fire all day, and other ranchers, members of their new association, came to help without being asked. That was the power of what they'd built, Evelyn realized. Community response was immediate and unquestioned. By evening, they'd contained the blaze, but not before it had consumed 50 acres of prime grazing land and killed dozens of cattle that couldn't escape the flames. Caleb returned after dark, his face black with soot, his clothes ruined, exhaustion radiating from every line of his body. Evelyn met him at the door with water for washing and food kept warm. "It was set deliberately," he said flatly as he scrubbed his face and hands. "We found where it started, oil-soaked rags in 3 different locations. Someone came onto our property in daylight and set those fires." "Did anyone see who?" "No, they were smart about it. Hit during shift change when the guards were transitioning." He looked at her, and she saw not just exhaustion, but something else in his eyes. Fear. "This is getting dangerous, Evelyn. Really dangerous. Maybe you should go back to town, stay with Mrs. Thornton for a while until this settles." "Absolutely not. Evelyn, no." She set the water basin down with enough force to slosh water over the sides. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. This is my fight too now. You don't get to protect me by sending me away. I'm trying to keep you safe." "I don't want to be safe." The words burst from her with surprising vehemence. "I want to matter. I want to fight for something. For the first time in my life, I'm not just existing. I'm living. I'm contributing. Don't take that away from me by putting me in a safe little box somewhere." Caleb stared at her, and something complex moved across his face. "You could die." "I could die in town too if Maddox decides to escalate that far. At least here I die fighting for something I believe in, standing beside people I—" She stopped, the word catching in her throat. Love. She'd almost said love. Did she love him? This hard-working rancher who'd promised her kindness and delivered it consistently? This man who valued her mind and her spirit? When had that happened? "People you what?" Caleb asked quietly, stepping closer. "People I care about," Evelyn finished, her voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, cupped her face with his rough, soot-stained hands. "You're the bravest person I know. You know that? You came here expecting a monster and instead found a war, and rather than running, you've made yourself essential to it. To me." "Caleb, let me finish." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I made you a promise at that train station, promised I'd be kind. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about keeping a promise and started being about something else entirely. Started being about—" The crash of breaking glass cut him off. They both spun toward the sound, and Caleb immediately pushed Evelyn behind him. A rock lay in the middle of the floor, surrounded by shattered window glass. A note was tied to it with twine. Jake rushed in from the bunkhouse, gun drawn, Tom and Sam right behind him. "Everyone all right?" "Fine," Caleb said tersely. He bent and picked up the rock, untying the note. His face went hard as he read it, then harder still. "What does it say?" Evelyn demanded. Caleb's jaw worked, but he didn't answer. She stepped around him and took the note from his hands. The message was simple and chilling. "Send the woman away or she'll burn with your precious land. Last warning, next time there won't be one." Ice flooded Evelyn's veins. The threat was specific and direct, not against Caleb or his men, who could fight back, but against her. The weakness in Caleb's armor. "See?" Caleb said, and his voice was ragged. "This is why you need to go. He's targeting you specifically now." "Which proves I matter to this fight," Evelyn said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the fear. "If I didn't matter, he wouldn't bother threatening me. The fact that he is means I'm helping, means our alliance is working, means he's worried. It means you're in danger, We're all in danger. That's the nature of fighting a war. She grabbed his arms, made him look at her. You don't get to make this decision for me, Caleb. I'm your partner, remember? Partners make decisions together. Partners also protect each other. Then let me protect you too. Let me stay and fight. Don't diminish me by treating me like some fragile thing that needs to be locked away. They stood locked in that battle of wills, neither yielding, until Jake cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, boss, but Mrs. Morgan has a point. Sending her away won't stop Maddox. He'll just find a different target, different leverage. And honestly, having her here makes strategic sense. She's been the architect of our alliance. Sending her away would be seen as weakness, might make our partners question our resolve. Caleb looked at his foreman, frustration warring with understanding on his face. You're supposed to be on my side. I am on your side. That's why I'm telling you the truth. Jake holstered his gun. We increase security, double guards. Nobody goes anywhere alone, especially not Mrs. Morgan. But we don't run. We don't hide. We show Maddox that threats just make us stronger. Slowly, reluctantly, Caleb nodded. Fine. But Evelyn, you promise me. You don't take any risks. You stay close to the house. You let us protect you. I promise, Evelyn said, though part of her rebelled even at these reasonable restrictions. That night, guards were posted at every approach to the house. Caleb slept in the main room, fully dressed, his rifle within reach. Evelyn lay in her bed, hearing every creak of the house, every whisper of wind, jumping at shadows. The fear was real and present, coiling in her stomach, making sleep impossible. But beneath the fear was something else, a fierce determination. She'd told Caleb she wouldn't run, and she'd meant it. Whatever came next, whatever Maddox tried, she would face it. Because this land, this fight, these people had become hers in a way Boston never had. She belonged here, and she would defend what belonged to her. Dawn came gray and cold, with frost on the grass and breath visible in the air. Autumn was deepening toward winter, and with it came the sense that time was running short. Winter in Montana was brutal. Caleb had told her that much. Ranchers hunkered down, survived, waited for spring. If Maddox was going to make a major move, it would be soon, before weather made large-scale action impossible. The question wasn't if he would strike again, but when and how. And when he did, would their fragile alliance be enough to withstand it? Or would they all go down together, their hopes burning like the east pasture, leaving nothing but ash and regret? Evelyn stood at her window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and harsh, welcoming and deadly. Montana in all its contradictions. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and made herself a promise. Whatever came, she would not break, would not yield, would not betray the trust Caleb had placed in her or the strength she'd discovered within herself. The war was coming. She could feel it building like a storm on the horizon, and she would be ready. The storm broke 2 weeks later on a crisp October afternoon when the aspens had turned to liquid gold and the air carried the sharp promise of winter. Evelyn was in the house helping Mrs. Harwood preserve the last of the garden vegetables when Sam came running from the North Ridge, his horse foam-flecked and wild-eyed. "Riders coming!" he shouted, tumbling from his saddle. "At least a dozen, maybe more. Armed. Maddox is leading them." Caleb emerged from the barn where he'd been working on tack, and Evelyn saw his face go still and hard, all the warmth draining from it. This was the moment they'd been dreading, the inevitable confrontation finally arriving like a death sentence delivered by courier. "Get the women inside," Caleb ordered Jake. "Tom, Sam, get your rifles. We hold the house, and we don't fire first, but we sure as hell fire back if they start something." "I'm not hiding," Evelyn said, stepping out onto the porch despite Mrs. Harwood's protests. Caleb turned to her, and she saw something like anguish flash across his features. "Evelyn, please. This is going to get ugly. I need you safe. And I need to stand with you. He's coming for both of us, Caleb. For what we've built together. I won't let him think he can intimidate me into abandoning you." For a moment she thought he would argue, but then he nodded sharply. "Stay behind me. If shooting starts, you get inside immediately. Promise me." "I promise." The riders appeared over the rise, and even at a distance their intent was clear in the way they rode, in the weapons displayed openly, in the aggressive formation. Maddox led them, tall and imposing on his black stallion, dressed as if for a social call rather than a confrontation. Behind him rode 12 men, rough-looking characters who had gunfighter written all over them. Not ranch hands. Professional muscle. They rode straight up to the house with an arrogance that made Evelyn's blood boil. Caleb stood on the porch steps, rifle held loosely but ready, Jake and Tom flanking him. Young Sam was positioned at the corner of the house with a clear line of sight. It was all terribly civilized and absolutely deadly. Maddox pulled his horse to a stop 20 feet from the porch. His smile was cold and calculating. "Morgan, nice day for a visit." "State your business, Maddox." "My business is simple. I'm here to make you a final offer, $10,000 for your water rights and an additional $5,000 for you to leave this valley entirely. That's generous compensation for a failing ranch." "My ranch isn't failing." "It will be." Maddox's smile widened. "Between the fires, the missing cattle, the unfortunate accidents that keep befalling your property, I'd say your operation has maybe 6 months before you're bankrupt. I'm offering you a way out with your dignity intact." "What you're offering is robbery dressed up as a business transaction," Caleb said coldly. "And my answer is the same as it's always been. No." Maddox's expression hardened. "That's disappointing, Morgan, especially considering your new situation." His eyes moved to Evelyn, and there was something predatory in the gaze that made her skin crawl. A man with a wife has more to think about than just himself. More to protect. More to lose. "You threatening my wife?" Caleb's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. "I'm stating facts. This valley can be a dangerous place. Accidents happen, fires start, people get hurt." Maddox leaned forward in his saddle. "But they don't have to. Accept my offer, and you and your pretty wife can start fresh somewhere safer, somewhere civilized, Boston perhaps." Evelyn stepped forward before Caleb could respond, fury overriding caution. "I left Boston to escape men like you. Men who think money and intimidation give them the right to take whatever they want. I'm not going back, and my husband isn't selling." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "You should teach your wife to mind her tongue, Morgan. Women who talk too much sometimes find themselves in unfortunate situations. And men who threaten women sometimes find themselves facing consequences they didn't anticipate," Evelyn shot back. "You're not the only one with resources, Mr. Maddox. We have allies now. Other ranchers who are tired of your bullying. You attack us. You attack all of them." "Ah, yes. Your little alliance." Maddox's laugh was genuinely amused. "You think a handful of dirt farmers can stand against me? I own this valley, Mrs. Morgan. I own the bank, the sheriff, half the town council. Your husband has convinced a few desperate fools to make a stand, but all he's done is paint targets on their backs as well as his own." "Then why are you here?" Evelyn demanded, her fear transforming into something like exhilaration. "If we're so insignificant, why bother with threats and offers? Why not just take what you want?" Something flickered in Maddox's eyes, and Evelyn realized she'd struck a nerve. He was here because their alliance had worked, had made him uncertain, had forced him to try negotiation before naked violence. "Last chance, Morgan," Maddox said, his voice dropping the pretense of civility. "Take the money, leave the valley, or what happens next is on your head." "Get off my property," Caleb said flatly. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was so thick Evelyn could hardly breathe. Maddox's men had their hands near their guns. Jake and Tom were ready to fire. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this would turn into a bloodbath. Then Maddox smiled that dead smile and straightened in his saddle. "Have it your way, but remember, Morgan, you chose this. You and your clever little wife." He wheeled his horse. "Let's go, boys. We've got other business to attend to." They rode out, not hurrying, making it clear they weren't afraid or intimidated. Evelyn watched them disappear over the ridge, and only then did she realize she was shaking, adrenaline flooding through her system. Caleb lowered his rifle and turned to her, his face pale beneath its tan. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. "Probably both," Evelyn admitted. "But did you see his face when I mentioned the alliance?" "He's worried, Caleb. Really worried. That's why he came himself, why he brought so many men. He's trying to scare us into submission before we get stronger." "He succeeded in scaring me," Mrs. Harwood said from the doorway, her voice shaky. That man is the devil himself. That man is desperate, Jake corrected. Mrs. Morgan is right. He wouldn't be here making threats if he wasn't worried about losing control. Question is, what does he do next? They found out 3 hours later when smoke appeared on the horizon. But this time it wasn't coming from Morganland. It was coming from the Brennan Ranch 5 miles to the south. Caleb saw it first, his face going white. Jesus. He's hitting them because they joined us. There was no discussion, no debate. Caleb, Jake, Tom, and Sam saddled horses and rode out immediately, taking firefighting equipment. Evelyn wanted desperately to go with them, to help, but Caleb's look had brooked no argument. You stay here. You keep this place safe. That's your job right now. So she waited, pacing the porch like a caged animal, Mrs. Harwood beside her, equally anxious. The smoke column grew larger, darker, and Evelyn's imagination conjured horrors. The Brennan family trapped in their house, the 3 sons burned alive. Thomas Brennan's dreams turned to ash. Other riders appeared, racing toward the Brennan place. Margaret Sullivan with 2 of her hands. The Johansson brothers. Danielle Ortega. The alliance responding just as they'd planned, just as they'd promised. It should have filled Evelyn with pride. Instead, she felt only dread. This was her fault too. She'd helped create this alliance, had encouraged these people to stand together. Now they were all targets. The men returned after dark, exhausted and reeking of smoke. The news was grim, but not catastrophic. The Brennans had lost their barn and winter hay stores, but the family was safe, the house intact. They'd managed to save most of the livestock thanks to the quick response from the alliance members. It's the same pattern, Caleb said wearily, washing soot from his face. Started in 3 places simultaneously, professional work, and this time there were witnesses. 2 of Maddox's men were seen riding away. We've got names. Will the sheriff act on that? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Doubtful. But we're documenting everything, building a case. Eventually, we'll have enough to go over his head, straight to the territorial governor. Caleb dried his face, his movements heavy with exhaustion. Thomas Brennan wants to quit. Can't say I blame him. He's got sons to protect. This isn't their fight. Did you let him quit? No. Told him that quitting now just proves Maddox's tactics work. Told him we'd help him rebuild, that the alliance means something. But Evelyn, if he wants out, I can't hold him. None of us signed up to die for water rights. What did he say? He said he'd think about it. But I saw the fear in his eyes, fear for his boys. That's a powerful thing. Caleb met her gaze. I'm starting to wonder if you and I are leading good people into disaster. Evelyn crossed to him, took his dirty hands in hers. We're leading good people to stand up for themselves. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, people might get hurt. But what's the alternative? Let Maddox take everything? Let him rule this valley through fear and violence? That's not living, Caleb. That's just slow death. When did you get so fierce? He asked, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. When I met a man who promised me kindness and delivered it consistently enough that I started to believe in possibility again. You showed me that standing up matters. Now I'm trying to show you the same thing. He pulled her into his arms then, a quick, desperate embrace that spoke of fear and gratitude and something deeper than either. She held him tight, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek, and knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare of constant vigilance. Maddox didn't attack again directly, but his presence was everywhere. Cattle disappeared in small numbers, never enough to be devastating, but enough to be a constant drain. Fences were cut. Equipment was damaged. Alliance members reported similar harassment, a campaign of attrition designed to wear them down psychologically and financially. Caleb spent hours each day riding between ranches, coordinating responses, shoring up resolve. Evelyn took over much of the ranch management, surprising even herself with how quickly she'd learned. She could read the account books now, understood the economics of ranching, could make decisions about supplies and scheduling. Mrs. Harwood taught her practical skills, how to preserve food, treat injuries, manage a household under siege conditions. At night, Evelyn would collapse into bed exhausted but oddly satisfied. She was contributing. She was essential. For the first time in her life, she was truly needed, not as ornament, but as partner. She also spent time writing letters, using her educated hand and knowledge of proper form to craft appeals to the territorial governor, to federal land officials, to anyone who might have authority over Maddox. She documented every attack, every threat, building a case with the same meticulous attention she'd once given to needlework and social calls. "You're a natural strategist," Caleb told her one evening, reviewing her latest letter. "This is better than anything a lawyer could draft." "I had excellent tutors," Evelyn said, "though I doubt they imagined I'd use my education for frontier warfare." "I'm glad you are. Couldn't do this without you." Their relationship had shifted in subtle ways since that embrace after the Brennan fire. Nothing overt, nothing spoken, but there was an intimacy now that went beyond partnership. Their hands would brush and linger. Their eyes would meet across rooms and hold. Sometimes, late at night, Evelyn would hear Caleb moving about the house and would open her door to find him checking windows, securing locks, standing guard over her sleep. Once, she'd found him outside her door, his back against the wall, rifle across his knees, keeping watch. "Caleb?" she'd whispered. He'd looked up, and in the lamplight his face was raw with concern. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about that threat, about you in here alone. I know it's foolish. It's not foolish. Can I sit with you?" So she'd sat beside him in the hallway, their shoulders touching, and they talked in whispers about everything and nothing until dawn began to lighten the windows. About his dreams for the ranch, about her memories of Boston, about the books they'd read, the places they'd like to see someday, the kind of future they dared to imagine. "I never thought I'd find this," Caleb had said as the first birds began to sing. "Someone who sees the world the way I do. Someone who challenges me and supports me in equal measure." "I never thought I'd be allowed to be this person," Evelyn had replied. "The one who speaks her mind, who fights, who matters." He'd taken her hand then, laced his fingers through hers. "You matter, Evelyn. You matter so damn much." But there'd been no kiss, no declaration, just that holding of hands and the quiet understanding that something profound was growing between them. Something that might have been love if they could survive long enough to let it bloom. 3 weeks after Maddox's visit, as October deepened toward November, Daniel Ortega rode in with news that changed everything. He was bleeding from a head wound, barely staying in his saddle, and the story he told was chilling. "Maddox's men attacked my place 2 hours ago," he gasped as Evelyn worked to clean and bandage his wound. "Came in force, at least 20 of them. Burned my barn, ran off half my herd. I got away with my family, but barely. They said it was a message, said to tell Morgan and his alliance that this is what happens to people who stand against progress." "Your family," Caleb demanded. "Are they safe?" "I sent them to town, to the church. Figured even Maddox wouldn't attack a church. But my ranch—" His voice broke. "Everything I've built, gone in an hour." Fury unlike anything Evelyn had ever felt coursed through her veins. This was beyond intimidation now. This was destruction, pure and simple. This was Maddox showing that he could take everything from them and face no consequences. "We have to fight back," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "We can't keep absorbing attacks and documenting them for authorities who'll never act. We have to make him pay." "How?" Caleb asked, and she heard the same fury in his voice. "He's got more men, more money, more influence. If we go after him directly, we play into his hands. He'll claim self-defense, and the law will back him. Then we don't go after him directly. We go after his reputation, his business." Evelyn's mind was racing, putting pieces together. "He runs cattle too, right? Ships them east for slaughter?" "Yes, has a contract with the railroad. So his reputation for delivering quality cattle on schedule matters. If that reputation is damaged, he loses money, loses contracts, loses power." Jake, who'd been listening, caught on immediately. "You're thinking we sabotage his operations." "Not sabotage. That would be illegal. But what if his cattle somehow got spooked and scattered? What if it took him weeks to round them up, making him miss his shipping deadlines? What if word spread that Maddox couldn't be trusted to deliver on his contracts?" "That's risky," Caleb said, but she could see him considering it. "If we're caught—" "We won't be caught because we won't do it ourselves. We hire it done. Use some of his own tactics against him." Evelyn looked at Daniel Ortega. You know the layout of Maddox's land, don't you? You've worked that range. Worked it before he bought it, yes. I know every canyon and waterhole. Then you could tell someone how to move through it undetected, how to reach his herds. Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes, followed by something like savage satisfaction. Yes, yes, I could. They spent the rest of the night planning, and by dawn they had a strategy. Nothing that could be directly traced to them, nothing overtly illegal, but a coordinated action that would cost Maddox tens of thousands of dollars and damage his reputation throughout the territory. It would be dangerous, it required perfect timing, and if it failed, Maddox would know they'd struck back and his retaliation would be swift and terrible. Last chance to back out, Caleb said, looking at each person in the room. What we're planning crosses a line, takes this from defense to active warfare. He crossed that line when he burned my barn with my children inside, Daniel said quietly. I'm in. He crossed it when he threatened Evelyn, Jake added. I'm in. Count me in too, Tom said, and Sam nodded vigorously. Evelyn didn't speak, just met Caleb's eyes and nodded once. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The plan went into motion 3 nights later under a moonless sky that provided perfect cover for movement. Caleb and his men, along with Daniel Ortega and volunteers from other Alliance ranches, moved into position around Maddox's grazing lands. They didn't have to do much, really, just open a few strategic gates, fire guns in the air, create chaos that would scatter thousands of cattle across 50 square miles of rough terrain. Evelyn waited at the ranch with Mrs. Harwood and 2 guards, pacing the porch, watching the dark horizon. If something went wrong, if Maddox's men discovered them, there would be shooting. There would be death. And Caleb was out there in the middle of it. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. At 3, she heard hoofbeats and tensed, but it was Jake returning with word that the first phase had succeeded. The cattle were scattered, chaos reigning on Maddox's land. At 4, Tom returned with similar news from another sector. Everything was going according to plan. At 5, as dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Caleb rode in, exhausted but uninjured. Evelyn ran to him, and he caught her up in his arms, holding her tight. It's done, he said into her hair. It's done, and nobody got hurt. His entire herd is scattered from hell to breakfast. It'll take him weeks to round them up, if he even can. He'll miss his railroad contracts, lose his reputation for reliability. Then it was worth it? We'll see. He'll know we did this, can't prove it, but he'll know. And he'll retaliate. We've escalated this, Evelyn. Made it personal. She pulled back to look at his face, dirty and tired, but alive, so wonderfully alive. It was already personal. We just stopped letting him be the only one throwing punches. He cupped her face in his hands, and for a moment she thought he would finally kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you. I know this isn't the time or place, but I need you to know. Whatever happens next, I love you, Evelyn Morgan. The words hit her like a physical force, and tears sprang to her eyes. I love you too. I think I have for weeks now. I was just afraid to admit it. Don't be afraid, not of this. Everything else, yes, but not this. Then he was kissing her, and it was nothing like the chaste kisses of Boston society. It was desperate and fierce and full of all the fear and hope and love they'd been holding back. She kissed him back with everything she had, tasting smoke and dust and promise. When they finally broke apart, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold. A new day, a new chapter. And whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, together. The response from Maddox came faster than expected. By noon, riders were bringing news that Maddox was organizing a full-scale assault on the Morgan Ranch. He'd called in favors, hired more guns, was planning to come with overwhelming force within days. The gloves were off. This would be a battle, winner take all. Caleb immediately sent riders to every Alliance member, calling them to the ranch for defense. Some came immediately. Others sent word they would come, but needed time. A few, including Thomas Brennan, sent apologies but refused to risk their families in open warfare. Evelyn couldn't blame them. This had escalated beyond anything they'd anticipated. beyond harassment and intimidation into something that looked terrifyingly like the range wars she'd read about in sensational Eastern newspapers. Wars that ended with death and destruction on both sides. She helped prepare the ranch for siege, working alongside Mrs. Harwood to secure supplies, set up a makeshift infirmary, ensure they could survive for days if necessary. She loaded rifles, learned to shoot with some basic competence, prepared herself mentally for violence. At night, she and Caleb would steal moments alone, holding each other, drawing strength from their newfound love. They didn't speak of what might happen, of the possibility that this could end in death. Instead, they spoke of after, of the life they would build when this was over. "I want to expand the house," Caleb said one night. "Add rooms for children, for family." "I want to help Mrs. Thornton with the school," Evelyn replied. "Teach literature and history, give these frontier children the education they deserve." "I want to grow old with you," he whispered. "Watch the seasons change. Watch our children grow. Build something lasting." "We will," Evelyn promised, though fear clawed at her heart. "We will, Caleb." On the third day after the cattle scatter, scouts reported that Maddox was gathering his forces. At least 30 armed men, maybe more. They would come at dawn the next day, under cover of morning light but before the valley fully woke. That night, Caleb gathered everyone in the barn for final preparations. In addition to his own men, they now had fighters from 6 alliance ranches. 23 people total willing to make a stand, against Maddox's 30 or more. The odds weren't good, but they weren't impossible either. "Tomorrow, we defend this ranch," Caleb said, his voice carrying to every corner of the barn. "We defend not just my land, but the principle that bullies don't get to win through fear and violence. Some of you have families. Some of you have more to lose than others. If anyone wants to leave, now's the time. No judgment. No shame." Nobody moved. Evelyn felt her throat tighten with pride and fear in equal measure. "All right then. We hold the house and barn. We don't fire first, but when we fire to protect what's ours. Stay smart, stay safe. And remember, we're not alone in this. We're together. That's our strength." As people dispersed to their positions, Evelyn stayed behind with Caleb. In the lamplight, his face looked carved from stone, all the softness gone, replaced by grim determination. "I need you to promise me something," he said quietly. "Anything. If things go badly tomorrow, if it looks like we're going to lose, you take a horse and you ride for town. You get to the church, to Mrs. Thornton. You don't try to be a hero." "Caleb, please, Evelyn. I can fight if I know you have a chance to escape. I can't fight if I'm worried about you dying beside me." She wanted to argue, to insist she'd stay to the end, but she saw the desperate need in his eyes and nodded. "I promise, but only if it's truly lost, not before." "Fair enough." He pulled her close one last time. "I love you. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that loving you has been the best thing in my life." "I love you too," she whispered. "And we're going to survive this. We're going to build that life we talked about." "Yes," he said, but she heard the doubt in his voice. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the sounds of people preparing for battle, and thought about how her life had changed in just 2 months. She'd arrived here expecting cruelty and had found kindness, had expected to be property and had become a partner, had expected to merely survive and had learned to truly live. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with her head high and her heart full. Because she'd found something worth fighting for. She'd found home. Dawn broke with deceptive beauty, the sky bleeding crimson and gold over the Montana mountains, as if the heavens themselves were preparing for the violence about to unfold. Evelyn stood at the window of the main house, dressed in her most practical clothes, her hair pinned severely back, watching as the valley slowly emerged from darkness. Behind her, Mrs. Harwood moved quietly, preparing coffee and food for the defenders, her weathered face set in lines of grim determination. Caleb had been up for hours, checking positions, ensuring everyone knew their roles, distributing ammunition. Evelyn had watched him move through the pre-dawn darkness like a general preparing for battle, and her heart had swelled with pride and terror in equal measure. This man who'd promised her kindness was now preparing to fight for everything they'd built together. "They'll come from the east," Jake said, entering the house with Tom and Sam. "Sun at their backs, trying to blind us. Classic tactic.
We're ready for it, Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. Everyone knows to keep low, use cover, don't waste ammunition. We make every shot count. Young Sam looked pale but determined, his rifle held with white-knuckled intensity. Tom was calm, the oldest and most experienced fighter among them. Jake's eyes held the sharp focus of a man who'd seen violence before and survived it. Evelyn moved to Caleb's side and he took her hand briefly, squeezed it. No words were needed. Everything they felt, everything they feared and hoped for, passed between them in that simple touch. The sun climbed higher, and still no sign of Maddox's forces. The waiting was agony, stretching nerves to breaking point. The Alliance defenders were positioned strategically around the ranch, behind barn walls and fence posts, in the hayloft, and behind the water trough. 23 people prepared to hold their ground against superior numbers.
At 7 o'clock, Margaret Sullivan shouted from her position near the barn, "Riders, East Ridge, here they come!" Evelyn's stomach clenched as she saw them, a dark mass of riders cresting the hill, silhouetted against the rising sun exactly as Jake had predicted. They came at a walk, deliberate and intimidating, their numbers clearly visible now. She counted 32 armed men, and at their head rode Ronan Maddox on his black stallion, tall and imposing and radiating absolute confidence. They stopped just beyond rifle range, and the silence that fell was suffocating. For a long moment, nobody moved, the two forces simply staring at each other across the grass and dust that separated them. Then Maddox rode forward alone, stopping 50 feet from the house. "Morgan," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Let's talk like civilized men before anyone has to die today." Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed down. "I'm listening." "You've made your point. The cattle scatter was clever, I'll give you that. Cost me considerably. But this," he gestured at the armed defenders, "this is foolishness. You're outnumbered and outgunned. I've got 30 men ready to fight. You've got, 20? And half of them farmers who can barely shoot straight." "We shoot straight enough," Caleb said coldly. "And we're defending our homes. That makes us more dangerous than hired guns fighting for money." "Perhaps, but you'll still lose." Maddox's smile was predatory. "I'm prepared to be generous one last time. You sell me those water rights today, and I'll let everyone here walk away unharmed. I'll even sweeten the deal, $15,000. That's more than fair." "That's blood money, and you know it. Blood money is better than just blood, Morgan, which is what you'll have if you refuse." Maddox's expression hardened. "I didn't want this. You forced my hand with your alliance, your resistance, your sabotage of my operations. But I'm still willing to end this peacefully. Take the money, walk away, live to fight another day." Evelyn couldn't stay silent. She stepped out onto the porch beside Caleb, ignoring his sharp look. "You talk about peace, but you've been waging war against us for months. Stolen cattle, burned pastures, threatened lives. You don't want peace, Mr. Maddox. You want surrender." Maddox's eyes found her, and something ugly flickered in them. "Mrs. Morgan, I'd hoped you'd have the good sense to be somewhere safe today. This isn't a place for women. This is exactly the place for me. This is my home, my ranch, my fight." Evelyn's voice rang clear and strong. "And you're not taking it from us." "How unfortunate." Maddox straightened in his saddle. "I gave you every chance, Morgan. What happens now is on your head. When your wife is widowed and your friends are dead, remember that you chose this." He wheeled his horse and rode back to his men. Evelyn felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder, tight with tension. "Get inside," he said urgently. "This is about to get very bad." But before she could move, something unexpected happened. More riders appeared on the western ridge, at least a dozen of them, riding hard toward the ranch. For a terrible moment, Evelyn thought they were more of Maddox's reinforcements, that they were truly doomed. But then she recognized the lead rider, Thomas Brennan, the Irishman who'd wanted to quit, who'd been too afraid to fight. And behind him rode his 3 sons, along with other ranchers she recognized, people who'd been too scared to commit to the alliance, but who'd apparently changed their minds overnight. They rode straight through Maddox's line, forcing his men to scatter, and took up positions alongside Caleb's defenders. Thomas pulled his horse to a stop near the porch, his weathered face set in hard lines. "Changed my mind," he called to Caleb. "Told my boys what their da was, a coward who'd let good people fight alone. They shamed me proper. So here we are, if you'll still have us." "We'll have you," Caleb said, and Evelyn heard the emotion in his voice. "Grateful to have you." More riders appeared, this time from the south. Eleanor Thornton leading a group of townspeople, men and women both, armed with rifles and shotguns and grim determination. She pulled up beside Brennan, her face fierce. "Maddox has terrorized this valley long enough," she called. "Some of us in town decided it was time to take a stand. We're not fighters, but we're witnesses, and we're prepared to testify about everything we've seen if this goes to trial." The tide had shifted dramatically. What had been 32 against 23 was now 32 against nearly 50. And more importantly, Maddox's intimidation tactics had backfired. His violence had united the very people he'd tried to divide. Evelyn saw Maddox's face darken as he assessed the changed situation. His hired guns were looking less confident now, some of them exchanging glances as if reconsidering their employment. Hired men fought for money, not principle. When the odds stopped being overwhelmingly in their favor, their motivation wavered. "Last chance, Maddox," Caleb called. "You can ride away now. No bloodshed, no death. Just ride away and leave us in peace." For a moment, Evelyn thought he might actually do it, might accept that he'd lost, that his intimidation had failed, but then his face twisted with rage and something darker, the fury of a man who'd never been denied anything in his life. "Kill them all!" he roared, drawing his pistol. The world exploded into chaos and violence. Maddox's men charged, and the defenders opened fire. The crack of rifles shattered the morning peace, and smoke began to fill the air. Evelyn dropped behind the porch railing as bullets splintered wood around her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Caleb was firing methodically, each shot carefully aimed. Jake and Tom were doing the same from their positions. All around the ranch, defenders were holding their ground, and Evelyn realized with shock that they were actually holding. Maddox's men were taking casualties, riders tumbling from horses, the charge faltering in the face of determined resistance. "Evelyn, get inside!" Caleb shouted, but she couldn't move, frozen by fear and the terrible beauty of what she was witnessing. People were fighting for their homes, for their futures, for the principle that might didn't make right. One of Maddox's men broke through the line, riding straight for the house. Tom shot him from his position near the barn, and the rider fell, his horse veering away. The violence was immediate and terrifying and utterly real in a way nothing in Evelyn's sheltered Boston life had prepared her for. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Maddox's men, realizing they weren't facing an easy victory, began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. Caleb and the others held their fire as the hired guns fell back, clearly having lost their stomach for a fight that had turned against them. But Maddox himself wasn't retreating. He sat his black horse in the middle of the battlefield, his face contorted with fury and disbelief that his carefully laid plans had crumbled. He'd lost, and for a man like him, losing was unacceptable. "Morgan!" he screamed. "This isn't over! You hear me? This isn't over!" Then, with movements so sudden Evelyn barely registered them, he spurred his horse forward, drawing his pistol, charging straight at the house with murder in his eyes. He was going to kill Caleb, or die trying, rage overriding any semblance of strategy or survival instinct. Time seemed to slow. Evelyn saw Caleb turn, saw him raise his rifle, knew that Maddox would be on him before he could fire. Without thinking, operating on pure instinct, she grabbed the rifle that Sam had left leaning against the porch railing, raised it to her shoulder the way Mrs. Harwood had taught her during those long afternoons of preparation, and fired. The kick nearly knocked her down, and the noise was deafening. For a moment, she couldn't see through the smoke, couldn't tell if she'd hit anything. Then the smoke cleared, and she saw Maddox's horse rearing, saw Maddox himself tumbling from the saddle, clutching his shoulder. She'd hit him. She'd actually hit him. Jake and several other men rushed forward, disarming Maddox before he could recover, holding him down despite his struggles. It was over. The battle was over, and they'd won. Evelyn's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the porch, the rifle falling from nerveless fingers. She'd shot a man. She'd actually shot another human being. The reality of it crashed over her in waves of shock and horror and relief. Caleb was beside her instantly, gathering her into his arms. "It's all right. It's over. You're safe. We're all safe." "I shot him," she whispered. "I shot a man. You saved my life." "He would have killed me, Evelyn. You saved me." He held her tighter. "It's all right to be scared, to be shocked, but you did what needed doing." Around them, the defenders were emerging from cover, taking stock of injuries and damage. Miraculously, no one on their side had been killed, though several had wounds that would need attention. On Maddox's side, 3 men were dead and several more wounded. The hired guns who'd survived were being rounded up, disarmed, their brief loyalty to Maddox evaporating in the face of defeat. Eleanor Thornton approached the porch, her face grim but satisfied. "I've sent riders for the marshal in Billings. The territorial one, not our useless sheriff. With this many witnesses to attempted murder, even Maddox's influence can't save him." Maddox himself was being held near the barn, blood seeping through his shirt from Evelyn's bullet wound. His face was ashen, but the rage in his eyes hadn't dimmed. He looked at Caleb with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Morgan. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy everything you've built. You'll regret this day." "I don't think so," Caleb said quietly, walking over to him. "You see, Maddox, you made a fundamental miscalculation. You thought we'd be easy to intimidate because we're smaller than you. Weaker. But you forgot that scared people eventually get tired of being scared. They band together, they fight back. And when they do, all your money and influence can't save you." "You shot me," Maddox said, looking past Caleb to where Evelyn still sat on the porch. "My wife shot you," Caleb corrected, "to defend her home. That's legal. What you did, coming here with an army to murder and intimidate, that's not legal. That's why you're going to hang." The color drained further from Maddox's face as the reality of his situation sank in. He'd overplayed his hand spectacularly. In trying to crush the alliance through overwhelming force, he'd created exactly the kind of public incident that would destroy him. The marshal arrived the next day with deputies and a territorial judge. The testimony was overwhelming and came from dozens of witnesses, many of them respected townspeople whose word carried weight. Maddox's hired guns, facing charges themselves, turned on him quickly, testifying about his orders to burn, steal, and intimidate. The paper trail that Evelyn had so carefully created provided documentary evidence of every crime. The trial was swift. Montana Territory justice could be harsh and quick when guilt was clear. Maddox was convicted of attempted murder, arson, cattle theft, and conspiracy to commit violence. The judge sentenced him to hang, and his empire, built on intimidation and illegal tactics, collapsed almost overnight. His lands were seized, his assets frozen, his contracts voided. The smaller ranchers who'd suffered under his reign suddenly found opportunities opening up. Maddox's former holdings were divided and sold to those who'd been his victims. Water rights were redistributed fairly. The valley, for the first time in years, knew something like justice. Through it all, Evelyn worked alongside Caleb, helping manage the legal details, ensuring that the alliance members received fair treatment, that the rebuilding began on solid ground. Her education, her organizational skills, her ability to navigate bureaucracy proved invaluable. She wasn't just a rancher's wife. She was a partner in every sense of the word. 3 weeks after the battle, as the first serious snow of winter began to fall, Caleb and Evelyn stood on their porch watching the valley transform into a wonderland of white. The physical wounds of the fight had healed. Jake's graze was completely better. The buildings damaged by bullets had been repaired. The cattle that had scattered during various attacks had been rounded up and returned. But more than that, something fundamental had shifted. The ranch felt different now. It felt like home in a way it hadn't before. Hard-won and blood-bought, yes, but theirs in a way that nothing taken easily could ever be. "I've been thinking," Caleb said, his arm around Evelyn's shoulders, "about what comes next, about the future." "What have you been thinking?" Evelyn asked, leaning into his warmth. "That I want to make this official, a real wedding, not just a legal arrangement, in the church, with everyone we care about present. A celebration of what we've built together." He turned to face her fully. "I know we're already married in the eyes of the law, but I want to marry you again, Evelyn, choose you again, knowing everything I know now. Will you marry me? Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were happy tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. And I've been thinking about your mother, about bringing her here, if she wants to come. Getting her away from your father, giving her a chance at a better life. Would you want that? The tears fell freely now. The thought of her mother, freed from her father's cruelty, living here in this valley where women could be strong and valued, was almost too beautiful to believe. More than anything. Then we'll make it happen. We'll send for her in the spring, once winter passes. Give her a home here with us. They stood in the falling snow, holding each other, and Evelyn marveled at the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. She'd left Boston expecting a cruel husband and a prison sentence of a marriage. Instead, she'd found a partner who valued her mind and her spirit. She'd discovered strength she never knew she possessed. She'd learned to fight for what mattered. The wedding took place in early December, after the worst of the winter storms had passed, but before the true bitter cold set in. The church in Silver Creek was packed with ranchers, townspeople, and alliance members, all dressed in their finest, all gathered to celebrate not just a marriage, but a victory. A victory over tyranny and intimidation. A victory of community over greed. Evelyn wore the white silk dress she'd brought from Boston, the one her mother had worn, altered now to fit her body that had grown stronger from ranch work. As she walked down the aisle on Thomas Brennan's arm, having no father worthy of the honor, she saw Caleb waiting for her at the altar, his face transformed with love and pride. Eleanor Thornton had agreed to officiate, her voice ringing clear and strong through the small church. We're gathered here today to witness a marriage that has already proven itself through fire and hardship. These two people have fought for each other, stood beside each other, chosen each other when choosing was costly. Now they choose each other again, freely and joyfully, before God and this community. Caleb took her hands, his grip warm and steady. Evelyn Carter, you came into my life as a stranger, and you became my best friend, my partner, my love. You challenged me to be better. You showed me what real courage looks like. I promise you, for the rest of my life, I will be kind to you. I will value you. I will stand beside you through every storm. This I swear. Evelyn's voice shook with emotion as she replied, Caleb Morgan, you promised me kindness when I expected cruelty. You gave me partnership when I expected ownership. You showed me that I could be strong, that my voice mattered, that I was worth fighting for. I promise you, for the rest of my life, I will stand beside you. I will fight for what we've built. I will love you with everything I have. This I swear. Eleanor smiled, tears glistening in her own eyes. Then by the power vested in me by Montana Territory and by the authority of this community that has witnessed your love and your courage, I declare you husband and wife. Not for the first time legally, but for the first time with full knowledge and full choice. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Morgan. Caleb kissed her then, in front of everyone, a kiss that held promise and passion and the memory of everything they'd survived together. The church erupted in cheers and applause, and when they finally broke apart, Evelyn saw that there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The celebration afterward at the ranch was raucous and joyful. Mrs. Harwood had outdone herself with food, and there was music and dancing and laughter that echoed through the valley. Alliance members swapped stories about the battle, embellishing details with each retelling until it became legend. Young couples danced under lantern light while older folks sat near the fire sharing memories and dreams. Margaret Sullivan approached Evelyn as the evening deepened, pressing a small package into her hands. For you, from all of us in the Alliance, a thank you for everything you've done. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting. On the first page, in careful script, was written, For Evelyn Morgan, whose courage inspired us all to stand and fight. May you fill these pages with the story of the life you've earned. It's beautiful, Evelyn whispered. Thank you. You earned it, girl. You're one of us now, Montana-born, even if you came from somewhere else. This valley is in your blood now. As midnight approached and guests began departing for their own homes, Caleb and Evelyn found themselves alone at last, standing in their house, the fire burning low in the hearth. They'd sent Mrs. Harwood to stay with Eleanor Thornton for a few days, giving them privacy for their wedding night. Tired? Caleb asked softly. Exhausted. Happy. Terrified. Exhilarated. Evelyn laughed. Everything at once. Me too. He took her hand. I know we've been living as man and wife for weeks now in every way that matters, but tonight feels different, like a true beginning. It is a beginning. Evelyn moved into his arms. The beginning of the life we choose, not the life we were forced into. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. I love you, Evelyn Morgan. I love your courage and your mind and your fierce heart. I love that you shot a man to save me. I love that you're not afraid to speak your mind or fight for what's right. I love you too. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you value me as a partner. I love that you kept your promise from that train station. I love that you've shown me who I can be. They stood by the fire, holding each other, and outside the snow fell softly, blanketing the valley in peace. The battles were over. The wars were won. What lay ahead now was the harder work of building a life, of partnership and compromise and daily choice. But they were ready for it. Winter deepened, but the ranch remained prosperous. With Maddox gone, new opportunities opened throughout the valley. Caleb negotiated fair water-sharing agreements with neighboring ranches. The alliance evolved from a defensive pact into a cooperative that helped all its members thrive. Small ranchers who'd struggled under Maddox's shadow suddenly found they could succeed when given fair chance. Evelyn threw herself into community work, helping Eleanor Thornton at the school 3 days a week, teaching literature and history to children who'd never had access to such education. She also began writing, documenting the history of the valley, the struggle against Maddox, the building of the alliance. Her journal filled with stories and observations, a record of frontier life from a woman's perspective. In late January, a letter arrived from Boston. Evelyn opened it with shaking hands, and when she read the contents, she wept with joy. Her mother was coming. She'd finally found the courage to leave Evelyn's father, had scraped together enough money for a train ticket, and would arrive in Silver Creek in late March when the worst of winter travel was over. She's really coming, Evelyn told Caleb, showing him the letter. My mother is really coming here. She'll be free of him. Then we'll make sure she has a home here, a real home, where she's valued and safe. Caleb held her as she cried happy tears. She'll see what her daughter has built. She'll be proud. As February turned to March and the snow began to melt, revealing green grass beneath, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, then all at once, and when she told Caleb, his face transformed with wonder and joy. A baby, he whispered, his hand on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Evelyn asked, suddenly nervous. Happy? Evelyn, I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. A child. Our child. The beginning of a family. He kissed her deeply. A family built on choice and love, not obligation. That's everything I've ever wanted. They began preparing immediately, converting the small guest room into a nursery, ordering supplies from Billings, making plans. Mrs. Harwood was beside herself with excitement, already knitting tiny clothes and planning elaborate meals for Evelyn's health. You need to rest more, she scolded when she found Evelyn working on correspondence for the Alliance. Growing a baby is hard work. So is running a ranch and managing an alliance, Evelyn countered, but she did take more breaks, did allow others to shoulder some of her responsibilities. In late March, as promised, Evelyn's mother arrived on the afternoon train. Evelyn stood on the Silver Creek platform, her heart in her throat, watching passengers disembark. And there she was, smaller and older than Evelyn remembered, her face marked by years of suffering, but her eyes bright with hope and fear in equal measure. Mother, Evelyn breathed, rushing forward. They held each other and wept, months of separation and years of pain flowing out in that embrace. Finally, they pulled apart, and Evelyn's mother studied her daughter's face with wonder. You look different, she said, stronger, happier, like you've become someone I barely recognize. I have become someone else, someone better, someone free. Evelyn took her mother's hand. Come, let me show you what I've built, what we've built.
The ride to the ranch was filled with stories, with Evelyn explaining everything that had happened, everything she'd survived and fought for. Her mother listened with expressions shifting from horror to pride to disbelief. "You shot a man," she said at one point, her voice faint. "I did. To protect my husband. To protect my home." Evelyn glanced at her mother. "I know it's not ladylike, not proper. But mother, out here, survival matters more than propriety." "I'm proud of you," her mother said quietly. "Terrified for you, but proud. You did what I never could. You stood up. You fought back. You became strong." When they reached the ranch and her mother saw the house, the land, met Caleb and the others, she wept again. But these were healing tears, tears of release and relief and hope. "You were right to leave," she told Evelyn that night as they sat together in the main room, Caleb having given them privacy. "Your father sold you, but you bought yourself back with courage. You're free in a way I never was." "You're free now too," Evelyn said firmly. "You'll live here with us. Help with the baby when it comes. Build a new life. It's never too late to start again." Her mother's hand went to Evelyn's stomach. "A baby. You're having a baby." "I am. Your grandchild, who'll grow up knowing that women can be strong, that they can fight for what matters, that they don't have to accept cruelty as their lot in life." As spring deepened into summer, the ranch thrived. The baby grew inside Evelyn, her body changing in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Caleb was attentive and protective without being smothering, striking that perfect balance between care and respect for her autonomy. The alliance continued to flourish. More ranchers joined, inspired by their success against Maddox. Water-sharing agreements ensured everyone had resources. Cooperative buying and selling of cattle improved profits for all. The valley that had been dominated by one man's greed became a thriving community of mutual support. Eleanor Thornton approached Evelyn in August with a proposal. "I'm getting too old to run the school alone. I need help, someone who can eventually take over. I want you to be my partner in this, teach more days, help shape the curriculum, train to be my successor." Evelyn, 7 months pregnant and feeling ungainly, was nonetheless thrilled. "Even with the baby?" "Especially with the baby, you'll bring a mother's perspective to education. Besides, Mrs. Harwood has already volunteered to watch the little one while you teach. She's desperate for a baby to spoil." So Evelyn began teaching 4 days a week, her belly growing ever larger, showing young girls and boys alike that learning mattered, that education was power, that their frontier lives could include literature and philosophy, and art alongside ranching and survival skills. In late September, as the aspens turned to gold and the air grew crisp with autumn's return, Evelyn went into labor. It was long and difficult, attended by the doctor from town, by Mrs. Harwood with her frontier medicine, and by her mother whose presence was a comfort beyond measure. Caleb paced outside, pale with worry, until finally, after 18 hours, the baby's cry split the night. Mrs. Harwood emerged, her face transformed with joy. "A girl! You have a daughter, and both she and Evelyn are healthy and strong." Caleb rushed inside to find Evelyn exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny, red-faced, perfect baby girl. His daughter. Their daughter. "She's beautiful," he whispered, touching the baby's impossibly small hand. "She's perfect." "She is," Evelyn agreed, "and she's going to grow up in a world where women can be anything they want to be, where they can fight and lead and matter." They named her Catherine Morgan, after Evelyn's mother, whose given name was Catherine, but who'd always gone by Kate. Little Catherine was baptized in the Silver Creek Church by Eleanor Thornton, surrounded by the entire alliance, by townspeople, by everyone who'd fought for the future that this child represented. As winter returned and the valley settled into its rhythm of survival and endurance, Evelyn found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year. She'd arrived in Montana expecting a prison and had found freedom. Expected cruelty and found kindness, expected to be diminished and instead discovered her own strength. One evening, as snow fell softly outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, she sat with Caleb, Catherine sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby. Her mother was knitting in the corner, content and healing. Mrs. Harwood was preparing supper, humming under her breath. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked softly, the question that had become a ritual between them. More than I ever thought possible, Evelyn replied honestly. There are hard days, moments when I'm exhausted or scared or overwhelmed, but yes, I'm happy. Are you? Beyond measure, he kissed her temple. You know, I think about that day at the train station sometimes, how terrified you looked, how I promised you kindness and watched you not believe me. I couldn't believe it. It seemed impossible that any man would choose kindness over power. And now? Now I know better. I know that the strongest men are the kind ones, that real power comes from partnership, not domination. That love built on respect and choice is worth fighting for. She turned to look at him. You kept your promise, Caleb. Every single day you've kept that promise. You've been kind to me in ways I never imagined kindness could look like. It wasn't hard. You make it easy to be kind, to be better than I might have been otherwise. He pulled her closer. We've built something good here, haven't we? Something that will last. We have. And it will last because we chose it, because we fought for it, because we refused to let cruelty and greed win. She looked at her sleeping daughter, at her healing mother, at the life they'd built from hope and determination. This is what victory looks like. Not just surviving, but thriving. Not just enduring, but flourishing. Outside, the Montana winter deepened, but inside the Morgan Ranch house, warmth and love and hope blazed bright. The battles had been fought and won. The empire of cruelty had fallen. Justice had prevailed. Not perfectly, but enough. And in a small cradle near the fire, a baby girl slept peacefully, unaware that she was the inheritor of a legacy built on courage. A legacy of women who refused to be silenced, of men who chose partnership over ownership, of communities that stood together against tyranny. Years would pass. The ranch would grow. More children would be born. The alliance would strengthen and expand. The valley would thrive. Evelyn would eventually take over the school from Eleanor Thornton, would write books about frontier life from a woman's perspective, would become a voice for women's rights in Montana Territory. Her mother would live to see her granddaughter grow strong and fierce and kind, would finally know peace after decades of suffering. Mrs. Harwood would remain with them until her death at 90, beloved and valued as family. Jake and Tom and Sam would become prosperous ranchers in their own right, their success built on the principles of cooperation and mutual support. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this snowy winter night, there was simply this: a family gathered around a fire, safe and warm and together. A husband and wife who'd chosen each other freely and fought for that choice. A baby sleeping in peace, her future bright with possibility. And in the quiet moment before sleep, as Evelyn held her husband's hand and watched her daughter breathe, she remembered those 7 words spoken on a dusty train platform that had changed everything. I'll be kind to you. That's a promise. A promise kept through fire and battle, through fear and courage, through every trial that had come their way. A promise that had become the foundation of a love deeper and stronger than anything Evelyn had imagined possible. She'd expected a cruel husband and found a partner. She'd expected to merely survive and learned to truly live. She'd expected to be diminished and instead discovered she was capable of extraordinary things. The Montana wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the promise of spring to come, of new beginnings and endless possibilities. And in the Morgan Ranch house, as the fire burned low and the night deepened, Evelyn closed her eyes and smiled, content in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home.